Morning, members. It has just gone, well, that says 9 o'clock, but we all know it's 10, so bit of confusion. Just because some of you, well, I'm sure all of you thinking, what's she doing there, and what have we all done wrong to deserve this on a Tuesday? Robin's not very well, so he sends his apologies. And the other apologies I have are from Andy and John Petrinos, and we do wish them well in their recovery. Declarations of interest, I'm going to go around the room, and I'm going to start with you. Evelyn? Okay, thank you.
I won't take part in the Wimbleby Lake item.
Yeah,
although I haven't worked for South West Lakes Trust for 8 years, I just feel that there could be, it could be thought that I had a link.
So they're both personal interests, to be clear. Christine?
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Going around the room?
None for me.
None for me.
And Stephen's on his way, so we'll ask him when he comes in, when he's negotiated the recycling lorry. Chairperson's announcements. Now, I do need to tell you that if the fire alarm sounds, the exits are around. Please don't stop to pick up any personal possessions and go straight to the gathering point, which is in the lawn at the front of Exmoor House. But you will know the alarm when it goes, and please don't use the lift, which I don't think most of us use anyway.
Can I refer back to the previous item on apologies for absence and apologise for Bill Evans, which he has asked for me to do?
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we now move on to approving as correct record the minutes of the meetings of the authority on the 1st of March. Can I please have a mover? Thank you. And Jeremy, thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. We'll go through them as usual. So they're on page 4, members. Sorry, page 1, and it's item 4, sorry. So page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. That's it. Thank you very much. So we do have one public speaker, Mr. Foxwell. Mr. Foxwell, do you want to do it when we get to the item? Thank you. And interestingly and very efficiently, the next item, item 6, the landscapes review, and this is where Mr. Foxwell, I believe, does want to speak. So Sarah's going to do a presentation for us, and then Mr. Foxwell will speak, and then we'll go into the debate.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. I'll take you through the paper, item 6, which is the landscape review consultation response. We have obviously had a couple of other opportunities to discuss this a little more informally. So this is now our proposal for our formal response back to government. So you remember the 25-year environment plan included a commitment to review AONBs and national parks. And that work started in 2018, and then we saw the Glover response in 2019. There was somewhat of a delay, partly due to COVID, some other reasons, and the final response came back from government in January 22. So we're now towards the end of the consultation period, which runs until the 9th of April, which is Friday. The original proposal, the Glover report, the landscape review, had about 27 proposals. Now, not all of those are being consulted on. Many of the recommendations have either not been accepted by government or have been accepted and are being put in place in other ways. So this really focuses in on the areas where government is seeking further advice and discussion. So, for example, I think it was Proposal 17 recommended that national parks had a third purpose. So, alongside the first two purposes on nature conservation and cultural heritage and access and promotion, they would bring the thing that is currently the duty, the social and economic well-being, as a third purpose, but that was ruled out. So, and there are other examples throughout the document where ideas that Glover and his team put forward have not formed part of the consultation. So going back to the report, you see at 1.3 there are basically 5 sections: landscapes for life, nature and beauty, landscapes for everyone, living landscapes, more special places and new ways of working. And the big themes coming out of it are that we need a stronger national framework, so more coherence at a national level, that nature and climate should play a stronger role in all that we do. That we need to be thinking about all parts of society being able to visit our national parks, people and place, and some changes around governance, which is around supporting local delivery. So we've had various discussions. We encouraged all of our partners to respond directly, so we've been putting out sort of messages to encourage people to look at the review and respond to it. We had a very useful meeting with the chairs of our partnership groups, and we had a discussion, or a brief discussion, at the Exmoor Parish and Consultative Forum, and you can see in there some of the sort of themes that are coming through in 4.3. In addition, over the last 2 years through our corporate plan, we've listened to what was in the report, and I think, collectively we've made a lot of changes already. We've certainly heightened our focus on nature recovery, on climate, on working with the farming community through the test and trials and FIPL and so on. So we've picked up much of what is in that report and taken it forward already. I think what I'd like to do now, if I may, is just go through the appendix, just to clarify. I'm not going to go through line by line, but I'm just going to sort of pick through the main items. So if you turn now to the appendix. So you remember there was a discussion about whether the first purpose should be strengthened to pick up some of the language around natural capital and nature recovery. And while we were in some ways welcoming that drive towards a stronger focus on nature recovery, there was a concern about some of the language perhaps becoming out of date, that we felt that the language had stood the test of time. So that's our proposed response. I think the other thing in there, which I know some members have raised and staff actually, was this real importance to include cultural capital and historic landscapes, that there's a real focus on nature recovery, but that can't be at the expense of the importance of cultural heritage. So moving to 7, again that's picking up the cultural heritage reference. And again, obviously very happy to include work around climate change, and indeed this is something that Exmoor National Park has really focused on for at least 20 years with things like, Mire restoration and all the work we've done on renewables. Okay, moving on to agricultural transition, question 8. Obviously very supportive. We've done a huge amount of work with our farming community, trying to support and work with our farmers, looking at sort of new sources of funding, and particularly the new ELM scheme, and working with them on FIPL. So we're really supportive of aligning national park management plans and funding that comes through support to farming and land management. So that was all fairly straightforward, that section, I think. So moving on to section on connecting people and place. We didn't feel it was appropriate to respond on the AONB's question. In terms of the second purpose and strengthening the second purpose, again, we felt it had stood the test of time, but also recognising that of course, we have been doing a huge amount of work on health and wellbeing for many, many years, all sorts of projects and plans, and so again, happy to include something around there, but just recognising that the resource needs that are there, and also a recognition that the language of special qualities, which is embedded in the second purpose, has been incredibly important over time, and I think particularly in things like planning, that reference to special qualities needs to stay. Moving on to, now this was a slightly, I think we were slightly surprised at the level of detail in the managing visitor pressure section. So lots of options and ideas for new powers or encouragement of use of existing powers in some cases. This isn't something that we had particularly strong views on. It's obviously much more of an issue in some of the other national parks. So while we're not going to sort of object to any of the proposals, it's not something that we are pushing for additional powers. We feel we could do a better job with additional resource, more rangers on the ground. It would be lovely to have those 1,000 rangers that were talked about in the initial report. Role of AONBs on 18, 19, 20, again we're suggesting no response on that. So we'll move to local governance, so that's question 21 onwards. Yeah, so improved training, yes, I think we all agreed that impossible to disagree with the need for improved training always. Streamlined process for removing members, again, a lot of discussion about that, and I think our feeling was that this is about the relationship between us and the county council or the district council or the parish council. In terms of performance management, yes, there could be something more strong locally, but we really would not want to see that coming from any kind of central body in terms of how we deal with those kind of issues. On the advisory panels, again, yes, that should be dealt with locally. I think we already do this to a certain extent through our partnership plan group, so we didn't think this was something that should be imposed, particularly on national parks. On the flexibility, I think we place great value on having that balance of local and national representation. We are concerned that there's probably a lack of diversity on boards, but it's understandable given the pool that we draw from, the population dynamics in the southwest. So I think we weren't going to say too much on that subject. On merit-based criteria, again, this again, it's so important that we reflect the geographical area, that we reflect the people that we're representing. And so, again, we didn't really see how that could work on a merit-based criteria. Because, we're always looking to, the counties, the districts are putting forward the members that represent those patches, and that's how as it should be. On reduced board size, I know there are different views around the room on this. We've currently got 22 members and about 60 staff. That's probably, the balance there is probably that we do have quite a large board given the numbers of staff that we have, because our staff number has reduced, as you know, over recent years by about 20. So, but how you would go about that, that's for a wider discussion, really. So I think that's probably one probably members will want to go around again in a minute. And I think we've had, some early discussions that perhaps the Somerset unitary movement is the opportunity to look at that again more closely. We're going to suggest drawing government's attention to the importance of having that balance between Secretary of State and local, and the need the need to ensure that, you know, you get the proportionate representation across Somerset, Devon and that sort of detail. On the appointed chair, Secretary of State appointed chair, we don't think that's a very good idea. I think it's really important that the chair is supported by the members of the board. And I don't think anyone's disagreed with that so far. Okay, moving to 22. We're suggesting we support the proposals to strengthen the statutory duties of you know, other organisations, so that they are there to further the National Park Management Plan, to further our purposes, not just to have regard. This has been discussed for many, many years. This notion, you know, having regard, what does that actually mean, to have regard to national park purposes? Whereas if other public bodies have a duty to further, that gives greater weight. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the power of competence. So this, you remember, relates to our ability to bring in income, really, to trade, to do things that are perhaps slightly outside of our direct purposes, but where they do support national park purposes, so it's bringing in funding. Now, there is disagreement around the national parks about how much ability we have to trade, whether we need to set up trading arms, whether we can act outside of our direct purposes. So really this is just to say that we would absolutely welcome clarification on our powers in this area, so that it's clearer. Finally, 25, it asks if we have any sort of further comments. And our main comment, I suppose, really is the disconnect between the expectation of government that national parks can continue to do more and that their remit can continue to grow, whereas in reality we're looking at a reduced grant year on year and a limit to how much additional funding we can bring in from other places. So I suppose that's our main theme on that one. We are second smallest in terms of funding of national parks, and with a relatively low number of visitors, we don't have the ability to bring in that sort of car parking income or other income that other national parks have been able to. I think there's a level of disappointment that some of the ambition in Glover hasn't followed through. The Night Under the Stars, the more resources, the commitment to long-term funding, none of that's in there. So yeah, some level of disappointment, I suppose. We wanted to make the point that the central bodies, I think the National Landscape Service was an interesting idea. I don't think there was much support for it, but I think there is a need at a national level to review, rethink the way all the national bodies work together, and I'm pleased to see that that is now happening. On planning and affordable housing, that's really been, I mean, it was quite strong in the original report, and it's not really coming through in the consultation response. And so we recognise that that is being taken up by government in other ways, but I think we need to keep reminding DEFRA that this is a really important part of our role here, is the planning function. And really that, you know, we must have stronger connections back into government through DEFRA or around DEFRA to make sure that some of those really acute issues like the need for affordable housing are actually dealt with. Okay, so that's a kind of summary of the report. So, Chair, do you want to open it up for discussion? Or do we
I'm
let Mr.
going
Fox
to Mr.
question?
Foxwell first, please. Could you come forward to the microphone, Mr. Foxwell? Just check it's switched on, would you? Well, I'm afraid this is the order we do things, so we do, yes. And I'm not the chairman, so I'm not going to make any decisions about changing that. I am, but, you know, I need to be careful not to overstep the mark.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Well, as you well know, that I came and spoke at the last National Park Authority meeting regarding this consultation document, and I mentioned there that a protected landscape some 93 times was in this Glover report. Well, what is the definition of a protected landscape? And it quite clearly shows that in this response paper from this National Park Authority to the Glover review, to this landscape review, that it doesn't pick up the important issues that were raised at that last meeting. Mike Ellicott raised an issue about the farming that landscape was a farmed landscape, producing food to produce that landscape. It needs to be grazed by cattle and sheep to produce that beautiful nature landscape that you keep referring to. And it clearly shows in this response paper that there is a clear lack of farming under item 8, agricultural transition, and it just goes down on the Exmoor National Park Authority response. Yes, 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 yes. Well, there's a box in that yes box to put comments, and I would expect that this National Park Authority would have a better, needs to, this is the one and only opportunity to put in those boxes that you support farming, to support a profitable farming income on that landscape for future generations. And, you're, at the end of the day, you're all up for re-election, and I wonder what you're all going to be saying on the doorsteps in the coming weeks, as to your comments in responding to this review. Anyway, I rest my case.
Thank you, Mr. Foxwell. I think the majority of us haven't got elections actually in the room.
Well, looking around the room, I can see
have.
quite a few.
And Mr. Foxwell, I'd just like to urge you to put in your own response as well.
I have.
Excellent.
But this is the fact, you're key to this landscape, and from what I can see, it's pretty poor, really.
Well, thank you very much. We're now going to open it up to our members for a member's decision about what you want to put in to the response to this consultation. So the floor is open, members. Vivian, was that a hand? Well, no.
Just a very important thing. At the last meeting, you said you were going to engage with the Hill Farming Network. Well, there was no engagement with the Hill Farming Network at all, because I'm a member of the Hill Farming Network. So that was a key group that you were supposed to engage with in the consultation document, and there was no meeting with the Hill Farming Network.
Thank you, Mr. Foxwell. Vivian, did I see your hand up there? Oh, sorry. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Before we go on to the debate, could you just remind us what is happening next with our consultation response? The next point was, how does this one from the National Park resonate or reflect other National Parks concerns? And right, that's okay. We've had discussions about planning reforms recently, and in a private members' dinner only last week, Michael Gove suggested that those planning reforms would not be carried forward, which is interesting. It's a very short article that I read recently. So I'm just a little concerned with all the work that we've been putting into this National Landscapes Review, what will happen next? So that's just as a general opening question. Thank you.
I'm going to be really naughty. I'm so sorry. It's just occurred to me that I need to declare a personal interest, because I have put in a response to this as well myself, as the lead member from Devon County Council. Sarah.
Thank you. Question on how are others responding. There's been many meetings with my fellow chief execs from around the other national parks. We're pretty aligned, I would say. There's some matters of detail, particularly around power of competence, where some national park authorities believe it's fine as it is, nothing needs changing, they're quite happy. But there's not a disagreement. It's just well, we think it's probably fine. And the other area where there are probably different responses is around traffic regulation orders, fixed penalty notices, and some of that, where some national parks actually are quite keen to have additional powers, and others are rather more relaxed. But generally, I would say, yeah, there is agreement. In terms of what's happening next, we are expecting the consultation response to be chewed over, and then we will have something later in the summer. That's what we've heard back from DEFRA. But meanwhile, there's a lot else going on. So there's a lot of work, particularly around the National Landscape Partnership and the development of the National Landscape Partnership. So this is the idea that we somehow bring together the National Association of AONBs, National Parks England, National Trails, obviously linking in with Natural England and DEFRA, and to try and work through some sort of a new partnership. But that's the aim, is for that to be at least up and running, or sort of has started by April next year, with a sort of bit of a mission and a vision. There's funding that's been announced or is being discussed fairly recently. So there's a very significant amount of money going into National Parks Partnership. So National Parks Partnership and the Communication Unit have had a substantial amount of money over the next 3 years, because part of the thinking is that while there's no new government money for national parks, commercial funding, private sector funding should be explored more than it has been previously, even more than it has been previously. So I think that's where government is putting some investment to say, well, can we get more money from the private sector?
I've got Eric, Mike, Stephen, and Vivian. So can we? Oh, and Penny. So and Susan. Goodness me. Right. I might have to go through that list again. So the next person I've got is Mr. Lay.
Mr. Lay, first time I've heard that from Andrea Davis. Never mind. Madam Chairman, listening to Mr. Foxwell, I don't think there's any nice way of putting this. To my mind, government policy at the moment is completely wrong. One of the key factors of life are air, oxygen, and food. Take away one of those, there's no life. Now, we're currently 60% self-sufficient countrywide in food, and the government policy looks, if it's carried through, would probably, in my estimation, drive that right down to 40%. Now, is that logical? I don't think so. But the ethos of everything, the green agenda, is driving things that way. How you tell them they got their basic policy wrong, I don't know, because that would supersede all this. But everybody got different opinions. The ethos has been for years, but we can import it, but recent events have proven the folly of that. Nature allegedly always does repeat itself. Well, was it 1942 or 43? This country was on the brink of starvation. So it'll take a little while for history to work through to that point. I think at that time, I think the key factor, anyone keen on their history, it was the sinking of the Bismarck that turned the tide. Oh, she's laughing, she goes. So what it would take here, I don't know. No one knows, and no one knows where this situation is going to enter. But I've said to you before, one thing that's going to happen for certainty is, for instance, like you've got the livestock farmers that Mr. Foxwell referred to. This coming autumn, straw prices will be through the roof, and they rely on purchasing straw. That's just one example, because it's worth a significant amount to the cereal producers in the east of England for fertiliser. So it will be ploughed back in rather than baled for. So supply and demand again. So it's this word self-sufficiency. Historically, it's been a dirty word, or poo-pooed out, whatever you like. But it's so simple. It saves pushing goods around the world and all the aircraft emissions, but nobody is interested in that. So from my perspective, the government you know, the Elm scheme, there's nothing whatever in that scheme to encourage any food production. In fact, it will drive it the other way. Thank you, Mr. Foxwell. I could go on and on about this, but I think you got my opinion.
I thought that's really helpful. I think we do need to, members, can you keep in mind, we need to take into this point about food security?
I will add, and you've heard me say this before, self-sufficiency would be quite easy on Exmoor. For instance, at the same level as Long Holcombe, and anyone, if you have driven that road for the last 30 years plus, they regularly grow something in the region of at least 2 tonne per acre of cereal there. That's per acre, not hectare. So it can be done, and needs must could easily force that to happen again. I can go on and on, but I'll shut up.
Thank you, Mr. Lay. And next to you, Mr. Ellicott, next, please.
Well, I can only echo what Eric has been saying, because when the Glover report was written, not when we received it, because it seemed to be years coming out of government, but when he was here looking around, it was a different world to what we live in today. And I've been going on about food security for several months now, because you could see what was going to happen. And I am just concerned that the review that we're going through at the moment makes no mention on food security. We have to start taking that into account. And I honestly think the Glover report is old news. It's gone. We can't do anything on the Glover report as it stands at the moment. I'm not saying that we couldn't in the future. If the world changes again and goes back to some sort of sanity, perhaps we could do things, and there are things we could do to look after the environment, but not at the expense of food security. And I think we need to do something about that. We cannot just ignore it, and I think Exmoor could be one of the first national parks in the country to stick its head above the parapet and make the suggestion to government that they need to change policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pugsley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm afraid it's the same theme, because I was slightly concerned to see that the columns on item 8 did just have a fairly bald yes answering them, even though, of course, on question 9 you do have the greater explanatory text. So I do think, A, there is a story to tell there, and actually one of partnership and cooperation and mutual support with our farmers and landowners, and I think it would be helpful, and helpful for the optics as well, if that could be fleshed out in that section somewhat, thinking practically. I think that is very important, because there is a story there to tell, and the park should be quite pleased to make those points, I think. Can I just say, however, that to my mind it's not even now just a matter of food security, it's going to be a matter of food pricing. As we would have seen in the press yesterday, we're expecting the price of a pint of milk, or litre of milk, to double in pretty short order, and that will happen with a lot of foodstuffs, and the era of cheap food that we've become very used to over the last 40 or 50 years is going to go, and there's going to be enormous farming pressures that we perhaps can't even contemplate at the moment, which will come now in very rapid order. And Mr. Ellicott is right, the Glover review and even the government consultation is very much focused on a different time. Things have changed dramatically over the last 2 months, and they have perhaps brought us back to the realities of the world and how we have to live, and a little bit of refocusing on the government's part won't hurt, and for us to be able to assist in their refocusing, I think would be a good thing.
Thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you.
On the paragraph to do with the Secretary of State appointed chair, I don't dispute the answers being given here, but I don't think they're quite strong enough. With great respect, the answer that we've currently are meant to be giving to DEFRA is no. This is not supported, as it's important for the chairperson to be appointed by the other members to ensure they have the support and confidence of the board. The chairperson is appointed annually and can serve for 6 years, providing continuity and experience. I don't dispute that, but I don't think that it conveys quite strongly enough how undemocratic this proposal is, and I wonder whether the wording could be at least adjusted in the first sentence to say to include the phrase, they have the support and confidence of the board and the local community. That's a suggested change on the wording of the response to the Secretary of State appointing chair.
Can we just pause there? Are members happy with that? Because it's going to get very messy if we keep going backwards and forwards. That seems, it's a very discrete detail. Are we all happy with that? Is anybody not happy with that? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Thank you, Mr. White. Moving on then, Mrs. Webber.
Well, obviously I agree totally with the previous speakers, as in Eric and Mike. Nothing is more important than being self-sufficient in our food and how it is grown. Nobody wants to see importing of substandard quality food flooding in here into Great Britain. I agree that the Glover report is a bit old hat. There's also some interesting points in this landscape review on the role of farming that has been mentioned. And it says quite clearly here, we want to see a coming together of ambition for our natural environment and our farming communities. It could be embellished a bit more by saying how important now, in the current climate, not just now, we've been saying this personally for 30 years or longer, but it could be embellished more that how important it is, not just for now, but for the future. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Warren.
Yeah, thank you. I have just a couple of small, short points. Firstly, the bit, it's really good at the end to see in the extra comments we talk about money and resource, because I think, within the whole of this, it feels like, to me, there's the real danger of national parks being asked to be literally all things to all people in every realm, and I think, end up being the butt of a lot of things, and that's not helpful and not right. So I think making the point about resources is really important. I'm wondering about just strengthening that, particularly, recall over the last couple of years, we've talked a lot about this whole problem of one-year funding settlements. It does not work with any sort of long-term planning, whether that's in terms of any sort of nature conservation work or any programme of work in any area of the authority's work. I really think we need to stress the fact that if Jeff is wanting to see, good long-term development across the parks in all areas, we cannot go year to year. It doesn't make sense in terms of anything working with people, working with nature, whatever. So I would welcome a strengthening of that, just to say that they need to move on from that. Because what we've seen, certainly with farming protected landscapes, that's really causing difficulty already. We've only got a year, we don't know what's happening. So I would welcome a strengthening of that. The other thing I would just say, as kind of building on the whole kind of all things to all people point, would be that what I'm just hearing just now, and I totally understand and am supportive in terms of the issues around farming, but I am a bit concerned that I don't think that Glover is old hat. I think there's a lot in Glover that's really good and important in many realms, perhaps particularly looking at agriculture and farming, that because of where we are in the world at the moment, that is perhaps less congruent, but there's a lot in Glover which is really sound and really important, not least in terms of people, health and well-being and accessibility. And also I would say that I'm just a bit concerned about the narrative that I'm hearing, perhaps about one thing or the other. It's food security and self-sustainability or the environment, and I don't think anybody really thinks that, but I'm just saying that because that's what I'm hearing a little bit of. And I'm not a farmer, and I put my hand up, but I do really appreciate and value and listen to my colleagues who do know all about that stuff, and I know how important it is, but I also think that we can't go back to the situation of one another. So,
I think we'll come on to having the debate about the food security
it's
as
really
a
important.
sort of separate, if I can sort of try and frame what we're doing at the moment. So can I take out of that, Sarah, I'm sure none of you are going to disagree with this, can we strengthen the response about resources and the fact that we need some sort of long-term plan rather than this year-to-year cash settlement, which is of no use to anybody very much?
Yes, we will do that, Andrea, thank you. Just to confirm, in case there's any doubt, we have had our settlement for this year and an indication that it is likely to be the same for the next 2 years. So we have had something of...
That's a cut.
Yes.
That's a really big cut. Just you know, if you think about how inflation and all the costs are going up, we're basically facing a big cut. So we're going to go off the subject if I'm not careful. So I'm going to bring us all back. You're indicating, thank you. The next person I have is Jeremy Yabsley.
I support all that's been said, and across the table as well, actually. All extremely pertinent points. Mr. Pokeley, in particular, I think. What I just want to pick out, we're in the park, okay, and lots is happening outside the park. Outside the park, in particular, the commercial farming is not engaging with elms, it isn't going to, at all. Elms, a very large unit in the east, will engage with elms, because the square mile of monoculture, wheat production or whatever, they've got enough room to do the bits around, and they can afford to pay somebody to do it. They will engage to that point, but I don't know how much good that really helps, or how much it really helps with nature recovery. But with the smaller units, the medium-sized family units, even are, and I know one very well, organic, a really quite big organic local dairy farm, very clever young man, very, very good at what he's doing, making money, not engaging, waste of time. Absolutely not waste of time. Little units like myself, where we're wet and we're not commercial anyway, and I'm in the pilot now after God knows how many months trying to wriggle through. I'm trying to wrap myself into the elms pilot project. I think I probably can without reduction in production much, because I'm not producing an awful lot. But what you can't do is engage with elms and then keep up your production, because you can't apply the fertilizer. You can't make money out of two bullets a hectare. You know, it just doesn't work. But so I'm just trying to pick out what I think we've got to do is find a middle way, and I'm sure there's one there that addresses the need for nature recovery, because without nature recovery, our production will drop off because of the lack of pollination and all the rest of it. We mustn't forget that aspect of it. We must find a way to keep our food production up and supply ourselves as much as possible, because if we couldn't get ships here or planes in, we would be in trouble in weeks, not months, in terms of food production or food availability. Cost is just another whole aspect, which is going to drive it anyway. Is that making any sense? I just wanted to cut through the middle there a little bit, and we need to respond, but we need to more strongly, but in terms of food supply. But we do also need, as farmers and producers, to recognise the need for nature recovery.
Thank you. No, can you possibly turn off your microphone, please, as well? I can come back to you, but not yet. No. Mrs. Nicholson.
Thank you. I think three things. One of them is not related to the farming question at the moment. It's this is the first one. On page 8, the streamlined process for removing underperforming members. I would like to propose the change or the addition of a word or two words. Performance management should be dealt with locally within agreed expectation frameworks, and with reference to the nominating or appointing is what I'd like added, bodies, because while we know that parish council elected members have to be nominated and then appointed by the Secretary of State, the others are appointed by the various people. Okay?
Yeah.
That's a very small thing.
Everybody happy with that? Or anybody isn't happy? It's probably easier. No, everybody's happy with that. Thank you.
Okay. The second one is to echo very much what has been said. We need to talk about farming. We need to talk about food security. We need, very much as Jeremy says, farming will, if we neglect the environment, farming will eventually fail. I'm not a farmer. Lots of my family are and other people are, so I won't say more than that. We need to talk about it. We need to make sure that we are both conserving the way we farm and the landscape, not so much the landscape, but the earth, in order to be able to farm. And we should remember that what we're tasked with conserving and enhancing, is a man-made landscape. It's not a natural one. So we've got to engage in this, and it's farming that makes it. So we have to engage with that. And it brings me on to my third point, which I think is on page, which is it is. It's about the strengthening of the duties of other public bodies. Clearer, page 10. Yes, I absolutely get that. However, two things. I've said one of them in more informal discussions, and I'll say it again, and also add perhaps a reason on it. It feels appropriate and proper that there should be a mutuality of duties. That if it is other public bodies' duties to further our purposes, then we should explicitly here have proposed, I believe, an equivalent duty to support the social purposes. We have a third duty, we don't have a third purpose, but to go along with the strengthening of other bodies' duties to us, we should have a much strengthened duty towards the work of other public bodies. We are particularly going to see in an area of low wages particular social difficulties in terms of housing and living, and actually our society functioning as things go forward. And I do believe we should explicitly join in and be required to join in.
Thank you. Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was going to go back to the farming side again and just continue the SWOT analysis of elms. I don't think there are many strengths, there are many weaknesses, and the threats are implicit. And just this week we were meeting with Brendan Commoners, and again the question of will cattle be on the commons, will farmers be on the commons in the future is out there. But I also wanted to try and look at some of the opportunities. It is clear to everyone that the pools of smoke from Swaling will not be with us, although Exmoor was burning well over the weekend. But there are the opportunities. We've mentioned the price of straw. We should be looking again at bracken harvesting. We should be looking again at cutting Molinia. Things like that. The opportunities for food production are there, but that can't go forward unless we sort out simple things like our housing policy, and we have places for people to live and our communities can thrive. And at the moment they cannot, and we can't look at things in isolation. We need to look at things on a landscape scale and a living landscape scale. And I was just talking this morning about how we are in our communities, we are losing the rented properties. We are losing those families. We are losing those key workers. Something has got to change. And why not say that now rather than a bland yes?
Thank you. I've got you all on a list, so Christine, you're next.
Thank you. This is a really interesting conversation we've been having, and I'm so glad that we didn't have this conversation 3 months ago or 4 months ago. It wouldn't have been the same. And it's frightening how much has changed in a short period of time, and it's still changing. So I am absolutely thrilled in a way that the Gov report has taken this long, because we can be really firm now with our thoughts, and we've had some great suggestions about how we can support the farmers and the hill farming networks and have more and more conversations in these next few months. How are we going to change? What do we need to change? How do we think differently? Because the circumstances are so very different. So I'm ever so relieved and very, very keen that we make some really strong, more discussions with people that need help. What help? How can we help? What do we need to be saying to government over the next few months? And I think it will change again, sadly. And we need to be there to serve the communities here in Exmoor.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Thwaites.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really a couple of points. One, I'm slightly concerned that we said we were going to consult or speak to the Hill Farming Network, and we didn't do so, according to Mr. Boxwell. That's a bit worrying on that basis. The second one, I agree with all the things about food, resilience and everything else. And the third thing really is, I just get a little bit concerned when you look at, we answer questions with, as somebody else has said, yes, 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 and we have the opportunity there to fill out with additional information, and we're not taking it. There are a lot of statements here which effectively, monitoring the effectiveness of update of new environment and management schemes in protected landscapes. Well, our answer is yes, but we really need to say yes and a bit more detail about why we think it's a good idea, because if I was going through this and referred and went through ticking questions, I'd go, oh yeah, okay, they agree with that, and just carry on. I would just ignore it, basically. Thank you.
I really applaud, as we've got to applaud, that the fact that you have so much faith that anybody's going to read this anyway. I'm just amazed that anybody in the room thinks anybody's going to read it. But I like the fact you're so optimistic.
I think that's the problem, because the very fact that as chairman you feel that people won't read it is also very worrying.
I think that I've probably been around a while, and I think that...
I think I'd be in trouble whichever way I answer that.
Yes, probably best not to. I think
Thank
that...
you.
I'll put the suggestion out here, because we are on this point now. What I would suggest is that we need to come back and... We'll look at the points that aren't to do with food security, if we may. Some of them we've gone through already. I've written a list of what we've got else to talk about. I think we need to then think about how we're going to maybe change some of these responses. And I will go back to what you did say, Mr. Thwaites. The reason we are here in a public meeting is so we can discuss this and change it. This is not the response. This is a suggestion, and we can change it. But I would suggest, and I know Robin's not here, and it's an awful thing to do somebody that's not here, is that Robin needs to write a separate letter as chairman, which will carry more weight than these responses ever will. Because I am a bit cynical about anybody ever reading this, except a civil servant. Now, he can write to the Secretary of State with a separate response, which is what I will urge him to do, and if he's still unwell, obviously I'll do it, with these points made in a very strong way, simply so that it gets straight to the top, rather than getting ending up on somebody's desk. I know I'm being cynical. I try not to be, because it's really unattractive, but... Right, I've got everybody coming back. Nick, I'm going to be very kind and let you come back, but I didn't let Mrs. Webber, so just remember that I'm probably storing up all sorts of evil thoughts.
Right. I was just thinking I'm going to get in trouble again whichever I say. But what I really want to make certain is that when we say we are going to consult with somebody, and we need to do so, even if it's just
I will come back to
hello
that one.
and goodbye. I mean, at least we've done it, but I would hope that we would do more than just that.
Mr. Thwaites, I'm going to ask Claire, I think, were you going to speak
Nick
about
is
this, or were
okay.
you going to speak about this, Sarah, about the Hill Farm Network and the consultation? Claire's.
I can do two things. One is just to explain in response, the way that this is set out, it's an online consultation, and unfortunately there aren't boxes for us to comment on all of them. It is a tick box, yes, no. So I think we have the option of putting in not a online consultation, but doing as members suggested and giving our reasons behind those. But it will have to go in as a, kind of a written response. So that's one of the issues in the way that the government has set out their consultation. On the Hill Farm Network, there was discussions with the Hill Farm Network in terms of, telling them about the response and encouraging them to make their own response, which I understand they are doing. So I think, it's not that we've ignored the Hill Farm Network, that, that has been taken forward. Thank you.
That's really helpful, that clarification about it is a yes or no box, which we didn't realise, I don't think. So I've got people coming back. The first person is Mrs. Webber.
Sorry. Very briefly, I just want to clarify that there's no way I think it's farming first and everything else goes to pot. When I said the Glover review was a bit old hat, I should have been a bit clear with some parts of the agricultural expectations. Farming does not have to be well, it can't be. We're organic farmers. We've been for 35 years. So you've got to work in hand with nature. And I'm not going to spout on about that anymore. But just so you're clear, that it's definitely not my intention to say that nature is not most important as well as food production. They work hand in hand. It's a balance, isn't it? Okay, lecture over.
Thank you. Eric, you were next. I'm being very kind here, remember?
Sorry, it's reference this letter. We'll forget the sarcasm and start again. Reference this letter. Yeah, I can see the logic in that. Two or three questions. Will that, before it gets sent off, members have sight of that or not? That's one question. The sort of thing I'm thinking about, in particular, the agricultural transition piece. I think it's widely known, energy supplies come into the same category as the food scenario, and that's going to become more and more acute as months and weeks go by. But regarding the agricultural transition, I think the folly of the word nitrogen and its reliance on gas for production speaks for itself. And in this letter, I would suggest there's the need to go back to more traditional farming. With traditionally, you've had reliance on phosphate, potash, lime as the basis for land management, but that is gone away from over recent years because of the nitrogen is a quick fix, basically. This needs to be emphasised in that letter, the need to go back to more, I suppose the word sustainable would come in here, traditional, and that, yes, by all means, in conjunction with nature. And something I mentioned before, we've lost a lot of our natural nature habitat with the I guess the stretch from here to Oakridge is the exception, but other than that, nearly all the woodlands have been, which is the natural habitat for wildlife, has been taken over by the pheasant, game rearing, and that is driven out wildlife, and to replace that is not easy. I think it's worth a mention because it needs a question mark. How can this be overcome? Unless you're going to plant the equivalent of all the acreage that's been lost, taken up by the pheasant shoots, I cannot see, because that is the natural habitat of most wildlife. But currently, it's out of bounds for them because the keepers, I know it's not nothing to do with agricultural transition, but it ties in with the nature side. But it's the detail of what's going to go in this letter regarding the agricultural transition, I think would be interesting.
Unfortunately, it's Friday, it's got to be in, so Robin has no idea what's happening in his absence, but he's going to be, this letter's going to have to be done this afternoon, tomorrow. You're going to have to trust us with this one, that you know, obviously Robin is a farmer, which helps a great deal. We've got all the comments written down, but we just need to do a very fulsome letter about this whole issue, which is very pertinent at the moment, but there's been in the back of many people's minds, I think, for a long time, that there must be a way forward. And I really like the idea of encouraging the traditional, sustainable farming on Exmoor. And I think that probably needs to be where we need to start the whole thing. That's okay?
Can I just add one word of caution? And that is, Robin's not here today. He hasn't heard the mood of the meeting, and he's been in and out of DEFRA that much in recent years. I'm a little bit fearful he's become somewhat brainwashed.
I don't think that's what's wrong with him, but this is being recorded and we need to keep moving on anyway. Right, bit more brevity. I'm going to keep going through, if I may, because I'm being really strict. Jeremy, you were next.
Just a concern that I've been around a while as well. Process concern that this response that we're talking about, we must get in. I think it needs to be part of our response, even if it's tagged on as well as going to a minister, because if it's looked up in future, this is Exmoor's response, and it's not there, it won't be there, perhaps. So just on that basis, there's two other things. We have a tenant farmer who's just moving to the Mariansley estate, Devon County Council estate, who's working with Aberystwyth University and the Home Office, developing lays, grass lays, herbage lays, that will fix more nitrogen and produce more nutrients without putting them on. I have seen lambs on one, and I didn't think it would fat lambs, but I think we're in the early stages. Okay, and a little point. It's longer ago than I thought. I should have mentioned it just now, but I was after a national park event in York some years ago, where I threw my toys out of the pram and left early, and it got back. That got back before I got back. But I went on stalking roe deer in Yorkshire on arable ground, and we were in rape crop, and it hadn't been harvested. I said, well, what's this? Plenty of roe deer. Oh, he said it wasn't combined because there's no seed. It hadn't been fertilised. The right insects weren't there, and it was shocking because it was hundreds and hundreds of acres of this stuff, and so there is a problem somewhere we need to deal. And I just thought it was a little point to bring into the record. Thank you.
I do remember when you were a bit naughty in York, actually, because I was chairman at the time.
Yeah, we had a row with Nick.
I do remember that very clearly. I'd forgotten about it. Sarah, can we put something into the narrative box, please?
We can. Can I just come back and make a couple of points, if I may?
Then Dominic.
Well, perhaps have Dominic first.
Yeah, thank you. I think I think partly I want to follow up what Jeremy was saying, but also it was really interesting how this discussion went around the room. And I suppose I just want to reinforce that we're capturing the sense here that because to begin with it looked like it was going towards, because exactly what Susan was saying is that there has been some reports recently. It's come out the NFU, it's come out some other farming lobbies. Right, this is the time to basically get those ploughs out and rip up the countryside and throw away the green agenda. You know, and we know, and it's been said, that is absolutely the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong thing to do across the country. It's catastrophic in the national park, and you know, it's all very well to talk about food security. Food security is irrelevant if climate change gets to a point where we can't grow anything. If nature collapses to a point where we no longer basically are able to sustain life. But coming back, the key word is transition, not I agree going back to some traditional farming methods, not all of them. It's not necessarily regression or reversion. It's a transition to a new form of farming that includes many, many old techniques, but must include new ones as well. And I think that's a kind of a nuance here that's being sort of lost in, do we go forwards or do we go backwards? Well, it's a bit of both. I think Robin actually has got a very good grasp of all of this, and I don't appreciate the barracking from the back of the room on that. And I think the issue to bring this in is about, which actually brings in Eric's point about the shooting estates as well, is this issue of whether we're moving towards a point of capital intensity or labour intensity. Exmoor has moved to capital intensity, bigger farms, bigger shooting estates, rewards to investors and not rewards to labour. Meanwhile, people who need to work on these things can't even find places to live. That is our most urgent problem at the moment. And we can actually find a way through the agricultural transition to actually bring both those issues together, as Jeremy was saying. There is a way to move towards more labour intensity and away from chemical intensity, exactly as Eric was saying, moving away from just spraying artificial nitrogen everywhere, moving away from using pesticides and so forth, and actually moving towards a different form of farming that brings in more people. That's a complicated thing to express in one little text box in a response to this. So I think maybe we just need to be careful about how we're talking about the transition and how we support that within the context of the national park. But what this shows is, again, we probably need another discussion about this sometime.
Thank you, Dominic. Yeah, I've been sort of scribbling notes all the way through because like you, I was a little bit alarmed at the outset when we started talking about food policy, which is a massive issue, a much wider issue for government, but alongside energy policy, climate policy, nature policy, all the other policies, and we're trying to juggle, aren't we, and find a way through all of this. But having to remember our purpose is to conserve and enhance the natural beauty, wildlife and cultural heritage of this place. You know, our job is not food security. We work in a context of those other policy issues, but I think bring it back to what is our role, why are we here, why are you members on the board? So I'm very happy to put something in about food policy, but I think we have to caveat in some of that more nuanced discussion that we had a little bit later about local food, about, I mean, possibly we haven't talked about the need for a sort of national land use strategy, but it's almost that, isn't it? It's thinking about where do we grow food, where do we support nature, where do we have wind farms, where do we do these things so they're in the best place possible, because, you know, as Eric said, it's probably not a great idea to pour a lot of nitrogen on the top of the uplands. You could do an awful lot more with regenerative agriculture a little bit further down the hill probably, and perhaps you do leave some of the rougher land, the higher land for nature and for people. I think, you know, we are in the kind of post-Brexit shock, aren't we? And then we've had the Ukraine war, and we've had pandemic, and we've had all the supply chain issues. So it is a really difficult time. There's a huge amount of volatility out there, and people need certainty. But, you know, the real bigger issues are climate and nature. We will get through these small shocks, but if we don't do something about the climate crisis and the nature crisis, we're in a lot of trouble, I would say. So I think it is about food production in the context of those bigger issues, and it's about sustainable food production, isn't it? It's about working with the land, working with nature, working with the skills of the people of this place that know this place and know how to produce really good quality food without damaging the environment. So if you're happy that we put something sort of along those lines, I think we can do that. So we'll weave in, talk about the need to secure food from our own resources, but within the context of nature and climate and beauty and well-being, if that's okay. Yeah.
I've got Mr. Holton's going to come back.
I'm on a separate issue. If I could introduce that, if that isn't.
Are we happy with that sort of tone of response? Yes? Everybody happy? Anybody not happy? So the letter, which you won't get to see before it goes, because hopefully Robin will be a bit better tomorrow, won't he? Yeah. I think he'll be fine to sort of look at a letter. Sarah, we probably need to get together somehow and do this tomorrow morning. We will draft something and get that over to Robin. You're going to have to trust me, I'm afraid. That's all I can do. Time's running out. But I've heard all you've got to say, and I will tell Robin. And there is a recording. Francis. Can you put your microphone on? Make your comment count.
Agree together between the Chief Executive and the Chair and the two Vice Chairs.
I can't see a problem with that if you're around. Yeah. Right, so let's go back to the other things. Can we just go to Francis' point before I forget about it? And then we'll come to you, Jeremy. Is that all right? Francis, you raised point 22 about other public bodies and you wanted that changed. I have to say I'm slightly alarmed because we've just heard that we've got a reduction in money coming in and we simply can't take on any more duties or even... Yeah, please.
I don't think we're envisaging other authorities taking on extra duties by having a duty to further our purposes in their work. I was not proposing we should be taking on extra duties, and that vote failed, but that we should actively cooperate with other public bodies in furthering their purposes in the way that we expect them to do ours. And that is purposes, I don't mean just all and anything, but where there is, for example, where there's a housing authority, where there's we should not say, oh, that's their business, we're not the housing authority, we're not the this authority, we're not there, so nothing to do with us. We need to be active in our consideration and cooperation, is what I'm talking about, not about us taking on extra duties. In the same way that we are saying to them, we're saying to government that we think other public bodies need to be actively considering and supporting our ends. We're not suggesting that they're taking on extra duties that would cost.
Can I just ask, I'm probably being a bit vague here. What exactly are you envisaging? Because we do cooperate with the Housing Authority and we do cooperate with the Transport Authority, for example.
They cooperate with us and have duties to us now. We are asking for those to be strengthened. If we don't think they're good enough, then and need strengthening, then I think we need to be prepared to strengthen our duties to them.
Sarah, have you got anything?
Francis, I think this is coming from places where, for example, you might have the Forestry Commission deciding to plant vast swathes of land and the National Park Authority being rather unhappy about it for whatever reasons. And the regard is... yes, well, we had regard, we thought about it, but we decided that commercially we needed to do this. Whereas if the Forestry Commission had to further, it couldn't do the plan. I think that's where it's coming from, rather than... Does that sort of make it a bit clearer? Because that's where most of the controversy's been in the past.
To take a particular case with a general statement, because there are other bodies going to be caught other than the Forestry Commission.
Yeah, or a highway authority would be another example.
Exactly, and it's much wider. Now, other bodies, particularly the local authorities, which have duties around housing and well-being and economic development for the population, the economic and social well-being of the population, we are not having that as an extra purpose. We know we're not. We have a role only ourselves in furthering our purposes. We are expecting other people, and we are encouraging the government that other people should have to further our purposes. Then I think we need to be more active in our support and furthering of and consideration of, and not saying nothing to do with UpGov, of the other things which are to do with the local population of the area. And I'm not asking us to spend money doing it.
Can you have a think about that one? Yes, thank you. Right, Jeremy, new point.
Well, it's marginally new. No, it's one of consistency within our response. The point that has just been made is that we're asking other authorities to respect us. I note that on page 7, we're asked to comment on the role of the AONB team's planning, and we make no response at all. Surely, if we're asking the authorities next door to have a duty care of us, we have a duty of care of our neighbours too, and should be supporting the roles that they try to do to protect their landscapes. And they are our threshold. They are within our curtilage. So we need to support them. We must make a response. We must say that they should have the powers to protect their landscapes as we do, because it helps us.
That's an interesting point, because I've obviously already submitted a response apart from the Devon AOMPs. But it's nice to have some encouragement from this end, I must say. Anybody got any feelings about this, one way or the other? Dominic?
On the AOMB point, because I think I took over from you, didn't I, on the North Devon AOMB, we discussed exactly this. One of the, in theory, yes, that would be great. In practice, it's a resourcing issue. The trouble is, who's going to do it? That means we'd have to have a considered response to every planning application, and of course, we can't. The AOMB simply doesn't have the resources to do it. So I think that, but that's not to say it's a wrong thing to set up the principle, which we're going to do, but it needs to be matched with some resources to help them do it, I think, unless I've misunderstood you.
Well, surely we should say that.
Yes.
I mean, the promise of this landscapes review was that there was going to be funding. We've just heard today that we're not going to be, in effect, we're going to be reduced by the rate of inflation for 2 years. Something's got to be said.
Can I propose then that we do support our AOMB partners, and equally mention in there that they need to be adequately resourced to be able to do this function? Is everybody happy with that? I'm being a bit sort of prescriptive. Sorry, I'm going back to my old ways, you can tell, couldn't you?
I'm conscious of time and that we have several AOMB
we don't need to
colleagues.
Generally.
Yeah. Well, we'd need to find out, if we wanted to support the AOMBs, we'd presumably need to find out what the AOMBs think about this first. It would be a bit odd for us to say something and then discover that the AOMBs were saying something entirely different.
I can send you our response.
That's one. There are many. Quantox,
I know.
Mendip,
I know.
Blackdowns. What I can do, Chair, is speak with the National Association of AOMBs and find out whether it would be helpful for us to put some response in here. So I do that.
I've seen Nick, I'm just reading something. I'm thinking about this myself. Hang on, I can't. I haven't got my microphone. Are they others just from us? Yeah, yeah. Is that mine? Yeah, but that's what I mean. Were you happy with that? Yeah. Okay, we found a solution. You'll have to wait. Mr. Thwaites is first. Mr. Thwaites.
It was only just really to say that do you have to be specific with the AOBs? Can you just say in principle that we support them?
That's what we'll do in that other column, yeah. And then we've got, because it's such short notice, you know, we've only got till Friday. I actually do agree with you. I'm really quite alarmed about what goes on in the OMBs. That is literally, it could be in Exmoor, couldn't it? A lot of that landscape could be in Exmoor, and it does worry me.
I was going to mention boundary reviews, but felt that was a step too far.
Okay, you're all being a bit naughty now. Jeremy?
Does the duty to cooperate help us at all with this particular issue? Does it not apply? Are we not already in a situation where we would be dealing with some of this, perhaps, or we could refer to it? I don't know.
Yes, I mean, the duty to cooperate refers to our planning functions, and so, you know, it is something that we have a requirement to work with other planning authorities and sort of relevant bodies. So it's linked, although it isn't sort of directly relating to the AONB. But that point could be added in terms of there is a vehicle through which duty to cooperate could help with this. The only thing I would say is that I know government has been looking at duty to cooperate under its planning reform, so it may be that actually that changes in future anyway.
Going to change the recommendations, and I'll need somebody to propose them. So the first recommendation is we note the government's response to the landscape review, and the second point we've got here is agree the response to the consultation and delegate to the chief executive in consultation the chairperson of the authority. You have to change that and the deputy chairperson to, but yes, to submit the final response in the light of any additional comments from members, and the chief executive and the deputy chairperson to prepare a letter. This is the bit where it comes in. Prepare a letter for the chairperson to send in consultation with the other deputy chairperson.
Correct.
Are we happy with that? Can I have somebody to propose that, please? Mr. Kelly, and seconded by his twin, Mr. Ellicott. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Do you know, it's really quite nice that I get something meaty. Robin's not here, so thank you. Well, it could have been terribly tedious, couldn't it? So moving on, we've got some really interesting subjects today, and Dan's here to talk about the update on the authority's work and approach to sustainable tourism. Break?
11:30
Oh, crikey. We have to have a break, do we?
Well,
All right, okay. 5 minutes then, till past. Okay, I think we've got everybody back. Have we got everybody back? That was 10 minutes and not 5. Ladies and gentlemen. Dan. Thank you for your excellent report. Would you like to go through it, please?
Thank you, Chairman, and morning, members. What I'll try and do is race through this fairly briefly, given we're a bit over time. You've got a paper in front of you. I've got a few slides which I thought would just help to bring some of it to life. I'm not going to go through every bit of detail, but happy to take any questions at the end. So, I mean, it's some time since we've had a kind of formal update to the authority on our tourism work, and given various kind of issues happening, we felt now was the time to just really bring you up to speed with what is happening and what's been going on. And I guess first and foremost, to me, it's just thinking about why we've got an interest in tourism, and fundamentally it is about delivering park purposes. You know, our second purpose is to promote understanding and enjoyment of the special qualities of the area. We obviously need to manage this in order to fulfil our first purpose around conserving the area, and it's a really good example of actually something that hits both our purposes and our duty, because obviously, as we all know, tourism is by far and away our biggest sector within the economy on Exmoor. And as you will all be well aware, COVID has had a huge impact. The figures in front of you on the screen at the moment are the 2020 figures versus 2019. We don't yet have figures for 2021, but you'll see we saw over the year, and of course that was a year where we had pretty much about 6 or 7 months of lockdown. So we saw almost a 50% drop in the economic value. Interestingly enough, visitor days fell more than visitor numbers. So what we saw was obviously a shortening of stays, a swing from staying visits to day visits, and a corresponding reduction in full-time employment of around 43% in that year. So a pretty devastating impact on the hospitality sector, and I think we're all aware of then the challenges of them getting back on their feet, particularly this last year in terms of the skills shortage and the lack of staff. So it's not been an easy ride for them, and I think, you know, it's going to continue to be a rocky ride given increases in prices and all the other things that we've already kind of started talking about today. This slide here just illustrates the seasonal kind of impact of COVID, and again this is 2020 versus 2019. So what you do see is that during that kind of peak season, July through to September, we did see a 10% increase in the number of visitors to the area. However, visitor days, so if somebody's coming here for a long weekend, 3 days, that would be 3 visitor days, 1 visitor number. So even in that peak season, when we were kind of had all these media reports about national parks being overrun, etc., we actually did see a very small decrease on the previous year in terms of the overall numbers. What we did see, though, is a big swing in kind of how they were behaving, where they were spending time. They were opting to spend a lot more time at open countryside sites, so some places seemed a lot busier than they had been before. And obviously that kind of continued, that reduction, throughout the year. So we also do normally every 2 years we do a visitor survey to understand, as well as the kind of quantitative information, we try and understand the qualitative views of visitors in terms of their experiences, how they're finding information, what they're doing here. For obvious reasons, we delayed it from 2020, but we did run it in 2021, and we run it over a 6-month period, and we collect data at a huge range of sites right across Exmoor. So what we try and do is pick up different experiences. So we're looking at different seasonalities, different locations, different types of visitors using those sites. I'm not going to go through all of the full details. You've got in your packs a 1-page kind of infographic that's on the screen in front of you, which provides quite a helpful 1-pager summary, really, of the key results. There is a full report online. I would encourage you to take a look at that if you are interested. And it's always worth reading. At the end, we ask around if they've just got any other comments, and that's often some of the most kind of fruitful responses come from that open question. But just a few highlights, really, is that despite all of the challenges last year around hospitality and responding to COVID and skills shortages, etc., there's an absolutely phenomenal visitor satisfaction. 99% of visitors rating their experience as good or very good. That's very on par with previous surveys. It's been running at pretty much 99% for the last kind of 5-6 surveys we've done over the last 10 years. What we did see this year, though, is a much higher proportion of those rating it as very good. So it's 81% rating their experience as very good. I think previously that had been around the mid-60s, so a big increase there. And we also ask about a Net Promoter Score, which is how likely you are to recommend a visit to Exmoor to friends and family. And anything kind of over 50 is deemed to be good, anything over 70 is world class, and we had a score of 86, so incredibly high. The national park status is very important. 96% of people agree that the national park seems well managed and cared for, and about 2/3 were positively influenced by the park status in terms of that was part of their kind of decision making in coming to Exmoor, was its designation. The areas of lowest satisfaction, it's worth highlighting: public transport, public toilets and roads. Probably no surprise there. To be honest, when we ask about what are your reasons for saying this, with the roads, some are quite prosaic about them being a bit too narrow and windy, etc. So you have to kind of take this with a pinch of salt. But I think it's also worth highlighting that, because we ask people to rate things between very good, good, fair, poor or very poor. And the average scores for all of those lowest areas are still running just above 3, so just above fair. So it's, although they're probably the areas we've got room for improvement on, it's not a kind of completely negative story by any means. I think one of our big challenges going forward is visitor travel, particularly in light of the climate emergency. And obviously COVID has changed things. People are less willing to use buses. I mean, bus services in the future, once the COVID subsidies come to an end, will be under even greater pressure than they have been before. At the moment, only 10% were intending to use public transport at all during their visit. 96% arriving in the area by private car. So there's a lot of work and quite a challenge, I think, around modal shift there. There's also, on the positive note, I think there's increasing recognition of the Exmoor brand that we developed with partners a few years ago. There's a big increase on those who are attracted by our Dark Skies Reserve designation, and a big increase in people who are attracted here because of the opportunities for local produce. And that very much reflects some of our priority areas of work over the last few years. So that's encouraging to see that hopefully is working. So just a few areas of kind of updates in terms of our activities around tourism. you'll be aware we worked with 8 other national parks within England to create national park experiences a few years ago. Initially that was aimed at the international travel trade and funded by Visit Britain. I guess as a result of both COVID and the kind of climate emergency colliding almost, we've had an opportunity since then to refocus that as very much a domestic offer. And I think, you know, that was, from our point of view, we were always interested in this project as developing the product rather than the marketing. So if you've got a strong product, it will sell itself, and if we've got a strong product, it can be aimed at many different markets. What's encouraging is now that all 15 UK national parks are participating in that, so that's been a really good indication of how we can work collaboratively across the board. Dark Skies has been quite a big theme for us on our tourism work over the last year. Last year actually marked our 10th anniversary as Europe's first Dark Sky Reserve, so it seemed fitting to give it a bit of focus last year. And I think one of the things we found over those last 10 years is that many of our visitors were looking for a tangible product. You know, for them, they understood that it was a Dark Sky Reserve, but they wanted to have a bit more hand-holding about where to go, what to do, some guidance around the experiences they could have. At the same time, the businesses lacked a bit of confidence in some areas around how do we actually make this work, what are the issues around weather, do we really know enough about astronomy, etc. So we've really tried to tackle those two issues with a project where we've had some external funding from the Hinckley Tourism Action Partnership to support us in this. We've done a whole load of training, primarily aimed at business owners, to give them some astronomy input, and it's been year round, and we're just actually repeating that this year thanks to high demand. And we're seeing that pay off. There's now a lot more accommodation providers, for example, talking about the dark skies on their websites. There are a number of experience providers offering dark sky experiences now which they weren't before. We've also tried to develop new resources for visitors, so if they want their own kind of self-guided experience, we've got a new astronomer's guide for the kind of more enthusiastic astronomers, those who have got a base level but want to know more about how they can best access Exmoor for those experiences. And we've launched the Dark Sky Friendly Business Scheme. We've got about 20 businesses signed up to that so far, and several more going through the training at the moment, wanting to gain that accreditation. And to me, one of the nicest projects we've done, really, because it was so simple, is putting in place the Dark Sky Discovery Trail. There was very little physical work involved. It was an existing route. We did put in some glow-in-the-dark ray markers and basically badged up this route from Larkbarrow to give people that experience. But whatever or wherever, they can come here, even if there isn't a formal event on. If they want that tangible product of the Dark Skies, it's somewhere where they can go, and it takes you right to the heart of the Dark Sky Reserve, and that's been incredibly well received. Great press coverage, great interest from those who have done it. We've also sought to invest some funding in a couple of hubs that can provide a focus for events. We've got one set up at the moment at Exmoor Bridge Tea Rooms, where they are offering now weekly events with a kind of indoor planetarium sessions, followed by optional stargazing walks afterwards. We are looking at another hub which would be more of a kind of base for kind of outside events, and that will be subject to planning later on today, actually. And then, yeah, we've maintained the Dark Skies Festival despite COVID. We've managed to run it over the last 2 years, and we've got plans again for next year, just being drawn up, which will run from the 13th to the 30th of October. And that's incredibly popular, and it works really well in terms of engaging other businesses. So we run a small number of events ourselves, but we invite other businesses, other organisations and community groups to kind of use the festival banner, if you like, and hang their own events underneath that, and that's worked incredibly well. Walking remains one of the top activities undertaken by visitors to a national park. Last year, just as we were kind of coming out of lockdown, we launched the new Explorer Walks, and these have been developed really to identify a gap in the market, but our visitor survey results from previous years have shown that there is a much stronger interest in the shorter walks, less than 2 hours, than anything else. But yet, if you looked at all the guidebooks, etc. available, most of them focus on longer kind of half-day-to-day walks. So we wanted something easy to use, something where you didn't have to be an expert in map reading. So if you're new to the countryside, you know, this would just give you that confidence. We had videos done of each of the walks in order to really promote them, and again help people have that confidence. They could try it before they did it almost, to get an idea of the terrain and where the walks took them. And yeah, we launched those just as we came out of lockdown, and incredibly successful. You know, I think we benefited well from some high profile publicity on both BBC and ITV. You know, we'd printed guides that we thought, you know, as a saleable item in our centres. We thought we had stock for 2 or 3 years, and we had to do a reprint within 3 months. So that was a really good news, and the feedback is really fantastic from people about those. What we're now doing is looking at rewriting. Some of you may remember the Golden Walks, which I think were done for the National Park's 50th anniversary, so almost 20 years ago, and we're now rebranding those as Exmoor Classics, which will be slightly longer than the Explorers, slightly tougher terrain, maybe a bit harder navigation, but that's the kind of offering for those who are looking for the next level up, and we're hoping to launch those this summer, and next year we'll be focusing a bit more on easier access routes, so the very kind of simple routes that anybody can follow that are suitable for buggies, wheelchairs, etc. Kind of, I guess, follows on a little bit from earlier discussions around our work on Eat Exmoor, where what we've been trying to do over the last few years is really just give people the opportunity to badge up their local produce so that people know that they are getting that. It came out of some research we did, which found a lot of hospitality providers were using local products, but they weren't actually telling anybody about that, and we felt that was missing a trick, both in terms of the potential to add value, but also the potential to add to the guest experience, because we know that many visitors are looking to have that kind of food experience. So a lot of the work we've been doing over recent years has been around branding. We've got these kind of posters here. There's 2 types of posters. One is for kind of hospitality businesses. There's also one aimed at retailers, just to promote the fact that they do offer local produce within their businesses, and lots of branding that's available to them to kind of flag it up on shelves or on menus, etc. And we've worked very closely with Visit Exmoor on this. They've done their Eat Exmoor publication, which has just come out, the 4th edition, a few weeks ago. And this year we're also launching a young chef competition. This is partly an effort to highlight our local produce, but it's also in response to some of the work in the Rural Enterprise Exmoor vision around kind of looking at skills and aspirations for people and trying to respond to the skills shortage that we've got in the hospitality sector by kind of giving an opportunity to really support young chefs, and there'll be 10 young chefs who will be kind of shortlisted, and they'll be mentored by an existing local chef to kind of go through into the competition. Very brief one on National Park Centres. They're doing incredibly well despite the challenges of COVID. Last year Lynmouth won Gold Award in both the Devon and the South West Tourism Awards. This year we put Dunster into those awards, and they won silver in the Bath, Bristol and Somerset Awards, and they have gone into the final of the South West Awards, and we'll find out how they got on Thursday. Visitor numbers obviously took a massive nosedive during the COVID year, or the first COVID year I should say, 2021. They have started bouncing back a bit last year. Obviously we reopened partway through April last year, and we've managed to maintain kind of our usual opening throughout the season this year. What's really pleasing is that despite this drop in visitor numbers, revenue has really surpassed all previous expectations. It's been a record year for revenue. This graph here excludes the online shop that we launched, so that would add a bit further to that as well. So I think things are going in the right direction with that. With the centres, we also did a customer satisfaction survey, and again it was incredibly high, a net promoter score of 74%, 100% enjoyed their visit, 92% left having learnt about the national park. And then we delved a bit deeper and asked them kind of, what are you inspired now to do as a result of your visit? Some of the answers are really quite heartening, to be honest, about what they would inspire to do. As I mentioned, we launched the online shop about a year ago, and that's had gross sales of about 13,000 in its first year. It was very much set up as a pilot and a trial. We've not particularly heavily promoted it. So I think we've got some more opportunity to do that now that we're kind of certain that it's working and it's kind of, you know, the systems in place are suitable for it. What we're also doing is investing some of our funding in our National Park Centre Spend to Save Reserve in improving the look and feel of the centres. If you think back to those graphs and the information, people are coming in, have a great time. When they're coming in, they're also spending more, which is all good news. but we are still seeing that drop in visitor numbers. And if I'm honest, if you look at this photo, when this is at Dunstone, it could be of any of our 3 centres really, it's not the most inspiring kind of welcome to draw you in. So if you know about what it offers, great, you'll walk in, but if you're walking by, it doesn't really inspire you to see that as a gateway to a national park. So we're investing a bit of funding to look at kind of new shop frontages, new window displays, etc., to try and stem that fall in visitor numbers and reposition them as places for inspiration as well as information, acknowledging that, you know, things have changed a little bit in terms of how people access information. We work very closely with Visit Exmoor as the main kind of tourism association covering the whole of the national park and using the Exmoor brand. You know, it's been an evolving story over several decades now, really, the kind of functions and support for tourism. And about 6 years ago, we kind of merged what was the Exmoor Tourism Partnership with the Exmoor Tourist Association to form the current version of Visit Exmoor, and they've become a lot more professional, a lot more proactive, I think, than they have ever been before. And they are now, they've just registered as a community interest company. That does mean a slight change when we set up the kind of current version. We did have one of our members, currently it's Evelyn Stacey, sitting on the board as a voting member, and myself attending as an observer or as an advisor. As they've transitioned to a CIC, we probably felt it wasn't suitable for one of our members to be a formal director, so the suggestion is that we would have 2 observer seats on the board or advisors, of which we are suggesting one would be a member, one would be an officer. And then lastly, just as we wrap this up, you'll be aware that we led very much on a partnership approach to the kind of response and recovery of tourism in the wake of COVID, and that partnership was incredibly successful. The plan was held up by ministers as a good example nationally as kind of how we can work in partnership with one another. And I think in a way the plan has probably run its course now. Things have moved on a bit. COVID hasn't left us, as we all know, but you know, the kind of knee-jerk reactions we're having to make to changing kind of regulations, things has moved on. So we're now looking to kind of work with those partners to come up with a renewal plan, which is looking very much at how we take tourism forward, but particularly in light of the kind of climate and nature emergencies, how we kind of renew our responses there. And so that will be a partnership approach between ourselves, Visit Exmoor, the local tourism associations within individual towns and villages, as well as some of our other stakeholders like the National Trust, district councils, etc. And so then the final slide really was just about reaffirming, I guess, our role in tourism. You know, it's one of these kind of, we've got a lot of scope as to how we get involved and how we best use our finite resources. And I think what I've tried to do here is sum up our role within 5 points. So the first point is almost the kind of the core work of the national park around looking after, conserving and enhancing our special qualities. That forms a bedrock of Exmoor's tourism activity. We then got a specific role, I think, ourselves to play around destination and visitor management, so helping to provide that quality and sustainable visitor experience. And we do that through information once people are within the destination, so the Exmoor Visitor that we publish, interpretation materials on national park centres. There's around managing our rights of way, which we know are kind of up there amongst the top in the country, our toilets, our car parks, those kind of fundamental basics of what makes a good visit to the countryside. We've also got a role to play around business training and engagement, and a role around developing new products and events. The third point is around information and intelligence gathering, so around looking at the long-term trends regarding visitor experiences, the volume and value of tourism. I think this next 4th point is quite an important one, the subtlety of here really around us supporting the industry to take the lead on the outward marketing of Exmoor as a destination. There are many who would look to us to do that, but we feel it's best placed that the industry takes a lead, but we help them, we facilitate them where we can and support them in that. And that's primarily through bodies like Visit Exmoor, but it can be at a national level through Visit England, it can be at a regional level, it can be at a more local level, you know, working with the individual associations and kind of town-based groups. And then the final kind of area for us to focus on is around facilitation and partnership working. So that's around bringing together the Exmoor Tourism Network as one of our partnership groups. It's around the joint promotion of the Exmoor brand, awareness raising, you know, for work that we do with press and media. we're not kind of outwardly doing the marketing role as such, but we do have a great opportunity to raise awareness. So I'll finish there. Happy to take any questions, and hopefully we've got 3 recommendations on the paper, which is to note the visitor survey results and the work undertaken in recent years, to approve our representatives, which would be Evelyn, to continue until the annual meeting as a member representative as an advisor or observer to the new Visit Exmoor CIC board, and myself as an officer, and to affirm our role in tourism as set out on this slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Ellicott's first.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's very interesting and lovely results, or great results to have achieved. A couple of things. One, I've had the pleasure of going to Linton once or twice recently. Mainly I went there for the lunch upstairs in the restaurant, which was very good value for money. But I also spoke to the young lady working there, and she was very pleased and excited to show me around as a member, and she did comment that she doesn't see enough of us. She would like to welcome any members, and through that invitation open to you, and I said I would pass it on to a meeting. So that's the first point. And the second point, I'm happy to propose the note, the amendments that were on the proposal.
Mr. Ellicott, can I be a pain? So I was going to ask if we change one of them. All right. So it does say about affirming the authority's role in tourism set out in section 5, so that forms part of the decision. Can we add into the first bullet point about the website? Because after reading your infographic, most people are getting their information from the internet, and I would hope when they put in the word Exmoor, they come up with our website before anything else. And this forms part of where we put our investment in the future. We make those decisions. So would you take that on, Mr. Ellicott?
Yes, quite happy.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm interrupting now. It's trouble with being chairman. You can't do anything, can you? Evelyn, you're next.
Yes, it was really to say that I think we should thank Dan for all the effort that he's made, because it has been very sort of like pulling teeth for a decade in getting the industry to take the lead. And they really are taking the lead now. And the formation of the CIC is going to see a real step change. But I think the authority can feel confident that any money it allocates to Visit Exmoor is going to be spent wisely, because everything is now planned. And there's long-term planning as well as short-term planning. They've also got some very able people. And I think Dan's and my job will be easier in terms of monitoring and that critical friend role, and it's not appropriate for the authority to be on the board. I think it's something that the industry and the community need to take on, but I do feel that Dan's input has been tremendous, and he's given people confidence to actually take on the new role.
I well remember that meeting nearly 2 decades ago where it all got very nasty, so you've just made me recall sitting in here and that going on.
I can remember meeting 3 decades ago when it all got
horrible.
It was a means to an end. Too long ago.
Yes, I was.
There were difficulties, but at the moment, there is healthy debate, but people do seem to realise that they need to move in the same direction.
It is actually really quite inspiring that we've got to where we need to be after all that time. So, yeah, it's good. Jeremy.
I just wanted to mention, I don't know if anyone picked up, that there was recognition of North Devon as a surfing location yesterday, and part of that was Linton, which is in the National Park, and just say that this is a tourism wave we shouldn't miss. Had a couple of other points. One was that buses and the car, too many people coming by car, but there is no alternative. And I was wondering whether the government announcing that there was funding coming for buses was actually going to benefit North Devon end of the National Park or the Somerset side at all.
Shall I answer that
question.
now?
Yes,
Because
please.
presumably that's to me.
Yes, please.
So the funding was announced yesterday that Devon got 14.1 million. Somerset, I believe, got 11.1 million. To be honest, we've been given, we wanted 37 million. That was to do what we would have put in our plan. So the work now has started about what we can achieve. We've been given quite strict guidelines about what we've got to do with that money. But having said all that, long before we had the announcement, and poor Dan doesn't know this yet, but Sarah does, I might have a cunning plan. But the cunning plan, we're talking to the bus operator that happens to take the bus to Linton, but the cunning plan's quite big, and I will announce it when I can, because it's not as easy as just saying, yes, we'll do something different. So the bus contractor has been approached, and he's working out whether he can purchase another bus, and it's supply of buses as much as anything else, as well as staff. But of course, the parishes between Barnstaple and Lynmouth will be the first to know if and when that happens, and that will start in May. But it's nothing to do with the bus service improvement plan. I'm looking at other Devon members that might suddenly think she's looking after her own patch and nobody else's. It's nothing to do with that. That work has got to go on yet, and the announcement was only sort of midday yesterday, so that hasn't happened. Will that make any difference? I'm going to speak on behalf of Somerset now. I honestly don't think it will, because there isn't enough money to do anything that we wanted to do, and we work with Somerset very closely to try and get more connections across the border. I really don't think it will. I don't think it will make any significant difference whatsoever to any of the travelling public. That's that, but I think I do have some news that will be coming. I'll be talking to Dan later about doing a joint venture. Mr. Kelly, you're not next on my list, so you can't come back. Sorry, I'm being very strict. Marcus.
Yeah, thank you. And Dan, I think Evelyn said most of it, but again, thank you. I'm always slightly in awe of the work you manage, the work you do and what you achieve along with other ex-Dev people in other places as well. And I think often they're the unsung heroes, because there's an awful lot of detail that goes on that maybe we don't see as members. And I know personally I have no hope of understanding half the things you do as well. I do have a couple of questions. I do disagree with the idea of surfing in Lynmouth, though. I understand it's got a very good point break, but that's from a previous midlife crisis, that one. With regard to questions, you said there was the fall in full-time equivalent employees, I assume, also partially down to skill shortage or just general labour shortage, for whatever reason there is. But I thought that figure, that 18% was their first ever visit. I think we probably do have a little bit of COVID to thank for that, because I remember speaking to people, what made you choose West Somerset? Well, you're the only place available that we could afford. And I think on that affordability thing is, people are satisfied with their trip to Exmoor. Are they happy with the value for money, which would be an interesting question on there, because I do, you only have to see the queues at the airports now to see what we're competing with, and it could be quite difficult. With regard to visitor travel and buses, I'll stay out of that because I'll probably fall into Purda if I did. But visitor travel, I think you look at the clientele and the increased use of electric vehicles, for better or for worse. I think long term it has to be for better, regardless of anybody's views on that. But you only have to sit on the Theophea and watch the cars go past and see how many now are electric that come out the southeast in particular, that we need to be maybe catering for them, and that maybe there's a USP there that we could sell if we could just get Western Power to increase the capacity, so we could have the three-phase that we all need for those high capacity chargers, and how we deal with that. With regard to the branding, with regard to Visit Exmoor, declared slight personal interest because I sit on that board with Evelyn. Again, I'm just now sitting on that board, although I don't think we've really had a discussion at my authority about how I sit on that board, but I'm sitting on it as an observer, and I think that's the right thing to do, and I congratulate everybody for getting Visit Exmoor to where it is in partnership. And you talk about, it's interesting, you talk about the website and the branding, and you talk about the shops, and that's a very valid point, because they do look a bit national parky, for want of a better word, but then that's the benefit, because they look national parky. So how do you get that balance right there? And I look forward to seeing what you come up with, because we all move on, and styles move on and changes, etc. I think I'll leave it at that, because I've probably gone on, but again, just congratulations. And I don't know if you got a seconder, did I miss it? But I'll second whoever proposed it. Thank you.
So Mr. Ellicott proposed it, and you've now seconded it. Thank you. Linda.
Yeah, some of it's reiterating what's already been said. I only go back 10 years, but it was a bit of a shambles when I was doing what Evelyn's doing now. And it's congratulations to both of you, not just Pam, but both of you have done an amazing job. I've just a couple of questions and points, one of which is around the climate emergency and transport and the walking. I don't know if you've seen the HS new initiative called Tread Lightly, where they're actually promoting part of their walking offer as all the walks go from the hotel, which came in really to sort of solve the COVID issue, but now they've kept it on as a permanent part of their marketing. And it seems to be very popular. I've been on one recently and really enjoyed it. So whether that's something we could do as part of our walk series, look at the Tread Lightly, either from hotels or village centres. The other question around that is the dark skies and other events. Are we able to help with transport to these hubs and events through our own minibus fleet or other ways to try and reduce? Because I must admit I wouldn't like to be going down to Wimblebourne in the dark with a lot of cars coming the other way, as well as the whole climate thing. Also linked to that, are we able to, you mentioned people not wanting to go on buses. There is this amazing bus route from Lynmouth over to Minehead, double-decker, open-topped, going virtually every day of the year, several times a year, and could you imagine more wonderful views? I mean, it's phenomenal, but it does seem very underused, and whether there's more we could do in the way of promotion, and encouraging similar things if people are worried about enclosed. I know it's a bit wet on Exmoor at times, but walkers wear waterproofs, don't they? And the last thing was the national park centres. I mean, it has struck me over the last few years that the AV room, particularly in Lynmouth, is just very underused, and whether there is more we could do about improving the feeling. I mean, it just doesn't feel nice when you go in. It's dark, obviously for good reason. Dark and a bit intimidating, and it's very dull. So whether we could look at that. Thank you.
Good point. The traffic that hasn't come back to buses is the people with concessionary bus pass and commuters. So that's the feedback obviously we know. And I did urge the government last week to try and do a bit of a national thing, because if you remember when the pandemic started, one of the big messages was stay off public transport. And we all heard that for some reason. Everybody heard that. And that we haven't had the opposite message come out. Interestingly, though, the numbers on trains in the southwest is above pre-pandemic levels. So, it's just one of those bizarre things about buses. But we do need people to get back on them, because the COVID recovery grant will end in September. And the way things are going, we can expect to see less buses on our roads. So it's all a bit depressing. Susan.
Thank you. Only a couple of quick points. So firstly, just to say, great report, and also the whole visitor survey report, excellent. And I love the infographics in it. I think it makes it such easy reading and really, concise way to look at all the data. So that's really welcome. So thank you. And I'm just was going to emphasise something about the whole sustainable transport issue. I don't think I was going to say anything particularly exciting. Everyone else has said more interesting things. I think the whole issue about how we get to the park, but also then how people move around the park. are kind of interlinked but also separate, and I think it's really good the more that we can do in terms of, you know, as Linda was alluding to around active travel, you know, the walking and the cycling / e-bikes within the park. But I think there is an agenda here also linked to COVID, but also more broadly around this modal shift and behaviour change, and, you know, other national parks are doing some quite interesting stuff around trying to sort of promote, you know, people coming like another journey, or, you know, doing it differently, and the benefits of not being in the car. So there may be some other things that we could talk about at some point. But it is a huge agenda, and I do get, I think people think, oh, it's all up to the park to solve transport, and of course we know it's one of those agendas which sits, you know, very much in other areas, but it's great to see the work we're doing on that. So yeah, that was all, but thank you, Dan.
Thank you. And my cunning plan, I might ask for a contribution of £1,000 towards the cunning plan, just so I can put EMPA on something. Oh, it's gone up because the demand's higher. The demand has gone up, hasn't it? When it was just me. Okay, Eric.
Yes, I got a negative. I won't go down well, I don't expect. Until you know what it is. This is something that's been very relevant over the last 2 years outside the park. So I cannot believe that places like Linton, Lynmouth, Porlock have been moving from this. I'm talking about, although Dan's slides didn't reflect it, the last 2 years you've either had shutdown or boom, everything open. For the first time ever, I think so, that demand exceeded supply. I'm talking about accommodation primarily here. The real negative has been outside the park, and like I said, I can't believe inside it hasn't had an impact. Where, shall we say, I'm talking about the residential rented sector now, where landlords haven't bat an eyelid at giving long-term, medium-term, short-term tenants short notice as possible to out, and that then being put on the holiday let adverts. It's caused mayhem in lots of cases. Now, within the park, I said, I'm not sure what the impact has been. Now, the situation the last 2 years, we may never see again, but then we're living in such a volatile world, you know, basically anything could happen. But it is the one major drawback there's been. I suspect supply and demand will slowly rectify that again if we don't get no abnormal situations. But because the park obviously is interested in residential housing equally as much as tourism, I don't know which would take priority there. You know, it is something to watch out for, and I'm struggling to come up with something. It's only government legislation, I guess, that can stop this. Is for residential properties, you know, paying council tax can easily be turned over as things stand to business rates. Without changing government legislation, I guess we're stuffed.
We are basically. So I'm going to get it back to where we need to be, because I've just been reminded of the time, because the clock's, I keep thinking it's 11:15. It's actually 12:15, members. We haven't got very long here.
But it's a point.
It's a great really point, but not for this particular debate, Mr. Lay. Okay. Sorry. Mr. Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. It's really tying up all these different points. Looking at the infographic, Dan, it's very good. We talk about the highest areas of satisfaction, and I'm assuming it's very difficult to improve on the levels that you've given. So if we move to the lowest areas of satisfaction, although they seem to be fair, it seems to me there's very little that can be done about it. You've mentioned about public transport, which we all understand, and the sustainable transport agenda is very important. The roads, well, there's nothing we can really do about that as well. So it leaves public toilets, which, yeah, possibly they could be improved. But are there any areas that Exmoor does not offer that may be deterring the visitor or a latent part of the market? Is there something that Exmoor does not offer that perhaps may be deterring the visitor? That's a difficult question to answer, but I think it could be important.
Yeah, Ben, I think the most obvious one is things for families to do, particularly in wet weather. You know, it is something, even we had our centre pre-season briefing yesterday, and that's the number one question that they struggle to answer. It's really wet. We're here with our 5-year-old. What do we do? And they asked me as a parent of a 2 and a 4-year-old, well, what do you do? And I said, actually, yeah, there isn't a lot, to be honest. You know, we stay at home. So I think that's one of it. We are working on things like the family-friendly cycle trails project, to look at things like the cycling as an opportunity, but that wouldn't be a wet weather one necessarily, but again, just kind of trying to coordinate some better experiences for families, because I think that is a gap in the market. Interestingly, for brevity, I didn't go into details today, but over the past few years, we've seen quite a drop in the younger visitors, so anybody under kind of 45-ish, really. And last year, we did see an increase in that, you know, and again, that will be thanks to COVID and all the kind of changes in people's behaviour. But if we want to continue to attract those younger audiences, I think that is an area to look at, not necessarily for us to lead on, but working with partners to encourage something along those lines for families.
Thank you. And then finally, I've got Mr. Hunt. Oh, Dominic, you've heard your hand.
Thank you. My question is regarding the revenue. I know you mentioned it before in a previous meeting that the revenue got up. Have we done any work to understand what that was specifically, how it's gone up? And a couple of questions around that. And I think Marcus mentioned it earlier regarding value for money. Did we ask in the survey, or did we give an indication do the people think they're getting value for money when they visited Exmoor? And in relation to that, do we keep any track of costs? Do we have any idea whether costs of cream tea, cup of tea, a hotel room, are they changing? Are they going up? And is that the reason why there's an increase in revenue? Because I wonder if this is something that we can help to understand, that if in future surveys, will people say, oh, I love going to Exmoor, but it was so expensive? Or are they saying, oh, actually, it was a really good day out and it didn't cost us a lot?
Thank you. So I think in terms of the revenue for the national park centres, I think it's been very much around quite a big focus around upping our retail offer and providing more relevant products and high quality products, if dare I say. And I think that's really been the main thing. We've also found, because we've had a greater number of people who either visited for the first time or it's their first visit in several years, we've probably seen an increase in sales of maps and things like that, so people are hungry for information to help them enjoy the park. We don't specifically ask in the survey about value for money. Partly it's always a challenge with a survey. Everybody wants to ask everything, and we just don't have, you know, you've only got 5 or 10 minutes really that you can break into somebody's day without them getting annoyed. So I think, you know, the STEAM data we get showing the value of tourism, that is index linked every year, so we've got some idea around whether it's a real increase in income to the area or whether it's just allowing for inflation. But I think, you know, the general hearsay is that Exmoor is generally deemed as a fairly good value destination compared to some others. You know, you only have to go to places like Padstow and things, and the cost of fish and chips, I can tell you, is a lot higher than it is in Lynmouth, for example. So, you know, we don't have any hard data on it, but I think certainly the anecdotal evidence is that we're probably on a par with what you would expect at the moment.
Thank you. So I've got 2 more speakers, Dominic, then Evelyn, and then we will be going to the vote.
Very quickly, just on, I know we don't like to wag the finger at visitors and tell them how they should behave too much, but there has been, National Sheep Association just did a survey this last weekend, there has been a huge increase in the amount of dog attacks on sheep. We've had 2 serious attacks this year on our sheep. That's the first time ever. And anecdotally, there's a lot more of that going on. And we've had considerably more run-ins with walkers, with people who refuse to put their dogs on lead and get quite aggressive about it. And this is, again, new. This is something that's happened very recently. And so now the police are asking for a clearer message, which is keep your dog on a lead and get away from this ambiguity around all close control. Because the problem is people don't know if their dog is under control until it's near a sheep and it jumps over a fence and it's in the field. So what we're hoping is that we can, I don't know whether we can do this within the park or on some of the leaflets we're doing already when we're telling people where to walk, but having a special message there for dog walkers that is much more clear-cut than it has been up until now. Because otherwise we're going to see more run-ins, and we have already seen, and we're going to see dogs shot by farmers. That's going to happen. So that's just something I think we need to be get a little bit more clear in our emphasis about rather than what we have been before.
Thank you, Dominic. Evelyn.
Very quickly on James's point, net revenue generally has increased because the VAT rate was temporarily decreased, which has enabled most businesses that are in that to actually keep more of the money and not hand it over. The difficulty will come if the government raises the VAT rate back to the previous level, because prices will have to increase because the people running the businesses have had such a huge hit on things like power, utilities, all of their other bills, raw materials. So it could be that we will look more expensive next year. But at the moment, they are benefiting from an increase in net revenue.
And Marcus, unless you come back, but...
Yeah, very, very quickly.
Yes.
I agree with that. I mean, the VAT rate, actually, for hospitality, particularly where they can't reclaim, is just crippling. And as a park, I think we don't know whether we have an opinion and can have an opinion, but we'll park that for a minute. And also the VAT threshold. What I wanted to ask, and I meant to, it's one I missed out before, was when the numbers, I think we said in July, they were actually not up or not, I can't quite remember what the graph said. Was that one down to capacity? And what I would say, I know everybody thinks everything was wonderful the last couple of years with visitor numbers, but I can tell you from experience that my figures, I know it's Greater Exmoor, not actually in Exmoor, were actually the first time that they were as good as 2001, which shows that what's been going on since 2001 is actually a downward trend. So actually to be thinking, wow, we've done as well as we did 20 years ago, is maybe something to think about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we're going to go to the vote now. So, Ms Ellicott's proposed. Mr Thwaites, no. Mr Kravis seconded. All those in favour? That's unanimous again, Judy. Thank you. Dan, you're doing item 8 because poor Rob is poorly. Can we keep it very sharp, please?
Yeah. I will do my best. So yeah, apologies really on behalf of Rob that you've got me. And in a way, this kind of chimes a little bit with really what Dominic was saying. So the last paper was very much about kind of tourism. This bit is about more practically on the ground, how we manage visitors and engage with them. And we first introduced a specific kind of visitor management plan last year following our post-lockdown experience in the summer of 2020. And we've reported on that since then. And I think the general consensus was that the approach that we took was effective and well received. And what we're proposing to do is to kind of, you've got a proposed plan before you for the coming season. We felt that, as we say, COVID is still with us. Some of these kind of uncertainties in trends and how people are going to behave are still going to be with us. And I know the dog issue, for example, we saw a massive increase in dog sales over lockdown. People and possibly an experience of dogs, etc. And now kind of we're seeing the fallout of that. As I say, it's difficult to predict exactly how things will pan out this year, but strong likelihood that we will still see some increased demand, that we will still see some pinch points, and high pressure points. And this is very much an NPA plan as opposed to a plan for the area. It's about how we deploy our resources primarily. And it's all really about how we offer a warm welcome and a quality experience, but whilst responding to those pressures from visitors and community concerns, and how we keep Exmoor special in all of this. So the plan before you, let's say it builds on what we've done in previous years, a slight lessening of the focus on the real COVID messages. I think we're kind of all well and used to those now. So the kind of approach set out is to positively welcome new and repeat visitors in our communications activities. So we do want to continue to offer a warm welcome. It is a core part of what we do as a national park. We want to reassure local communities and businesses who are worried about overcrowding, and especially the impact of more visitors on the landscape. But equally, it's about balance around, the communities also need those visitors to ensure the survival of tourism and retail sectors within the area. And it's around managing visitors and visitor infrastructure on the ground to ensure that we offer that high quality experience and that we engage with visitors, and especially those who are new to the area, haven't necessarily been to a countryside much before. What we did last year is we deployed additional resources in terms of our ranger team on the ground, so we had additional, particularly weekend cover during the high season, which we are proposing to continue on to this summer. We also moved away from running things like our big adventure days, which have been fairly big events in the past, which were very, very successful, but they're quite resource hungry, and they were quite kind of slow moving in terms of setting them up. So what we trialled last year was more pop-up events, so we could go to particular areas if there were problems, if there were flashpoints. We could deploy fairly agile, fairly quickly. We could respond to a weather, we could respond to what's happening on the ground, and just rock up with some kit and engage whoever was in that area at that time. So that alongside our national park centres, as fixed locations, appear to work well. So I'll leave it there. The paper's in front of you, and if you've got any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. Mr. Ellicott.
I recommend that we note and approve the plan. Thank you very much, then.
Thank you, Mr. Pugsley. Mr. Hunt.
Very quick question. The National Trust do extremely well by making use of volunteers. Do we make use of volunteers to aid us in promoting the park in any way? Maybe in conjunction with our ranger who can engage more people?
Yeah, we certainly make good use of volunteers at events and things. They add a lot of value to that. I think, we have drawn a distinction though between the kind of uniformed roles of a ranger, where we're potentially looking at a bit more enforcement and things, where to involve volunteers at that level for us would probably require a great more resource to coordinate and manage them than we've currently got. But yeah, certainly there is an opportunity to use them at events and things. There's an opportunity to use them to almost backfill some of what, and ease pressure, allowing rangers to spend more time to engage with visitors, for example. So yeah, there's definitely an opportunity there.
I have no other hands up, so if we can go to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, Dan. Moving on, personnel update is there. So Mr. Haddock and Miss Weeks have started with us. Mr. Flint has left us, and Miss Bradford is staying with us. I think that's just about sums that one up. I have no items of urgency, so therefore I'm now going to close the meeting. Thank you for being tolerant.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the planning section of our affairs. We begin with item 11, which is appeals. 11.1 is to note the decision of the Secretary of State in respect of Spa Hangar Equestrian Centre and Farm Barbrook. Mr. Kinsella.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd introduce some photographs for the next two appeals, just to provide a bit of context for members, and when I'm talking through briefly the decision, it just helps to illustrate the points. So the first one, as the Chair has rightly set out, is related to Spa Hangar Equestrian Centre, and was an appeal against a condition that was imposed on a planning decision that was made in early 2020. The condition in question was a pre-agreed condition with the applicant at the time, but once the decision is made, they decided that they felt that it wasn't necessary. You can see by the papers that the inspector's decision was to allow this particular appeal to retain the plastic UPVC and aluminium doors and windows. You can see on the right hand side of the slide the existing building that was subject to the application for retention. You can see that the walls were of timber construction. The roof was a steel corrugated finish, and then on the left you can see what it replaced before the application was submitted. So the reason why I include that photograph is it does provide some context to the relevant parts of the appeal decisions, which are largely within paragraphs 7 and 8 of the decision, where the inspector took the view that clearly the replacement structure was a significant improvement, was more traditional, and I think in the words of the inspector, noted a more sophisticated design, made particular reference to the veranda, and that they felt that the policy itself, CES 6 of the local plan, did not say that all new elements of development needed to be of a traditional material, and I think the exact working is, I do not interpret this to impose an absolute requirement and then went on to balance the previous structure against the merits of the existing structure, and came to the view that on balance they should be retained. In terms of a decision, it's a well-reasoned decision by the inspector. I do have a small frustration just in terms of the decision-making of this decision in particular, insofar as it almost implies a good enough stance around design, and everything that's coming through the National Planning Policy Framework and what we're encouraged to do as planning authorities to improve design goes somewhat against that. But in terms of the reasoning behind it, there's no reason for officers to particularly object to it, yeah, that's where we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comment, ladies and gentlemen? Mrs. Nicholson.
It seemed to follow perhaps the argument that we had about, was it road water, where we felt that the design of the windows actually was an improvement.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just to come back on that, I do agree, and also follows sort of certain discussions we're having at the moment with other sites, taking into account some of these appeal decisions and about how, you know, the consideration of how publicly viewable some of the sites are, and taking into context the fabric of the building and the, you know, whether they're traditional construction, whether they're within the conservation area, those type of things, and factoring that into our decisions. So we are sort of reflecting on the decisions, and as I said, my only real frustration is just that the bar just felt as if it was sort of set a bit low in this instance, but there we are. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on to the next appeal, if we may, which is, in this case, a refusal. The dismissal of the appeal in relation to application 6/2021-101 at the Hazery, Luxborough. Mr. Kinsella.
Thank you. Sorry. I just share a couple of images of the proposed plans that were submitted with the application for this site. It was related to a new vehicular entrance to the premises. What the slide doesn't show is, in terms of the land falls away immediately from the boundary of the highway here, and the land within the site is at a much lower level. So the proposal was to create retaining structures that were to be stone-faced in this location, and then leading into the site. As the Chair rightly points out, this appeal was dismissed, and again, the more significant elements of the decision can be found in paragraph 6, where the inspector in this instance finds that the proposal would be stark, substantial, man-made structure in an otherwise predominantly natural landscape, and that they felt that that was a harmful impact that wasn't outweighed by the benefits of the scheme. You can see through the decision letter that the applicant had made some suggestions that existing stone bridges were unsafe, but this was given limited weight due to the lack of evidence before the inspector. And then again in paragraph 9, it concludes that given my findings in respect to the visual impact of the proposed development, I conclude that the proposal would not conserve and enhance the landscape and the scenic beauty of the national park, and result would be contrary to the relevant policies that are listed there. So yeah, a useful decision, and that balance between allowing a resident to have vehicular access into their property against the visual harm caused by the creation of that. I think this is a relatively unusual situation where the land levels were so different, and so therefore the engineering element was so stark, but it does give a good decision around the inspectors and the authority's decision around that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kinsella. Dr. Kelly.
I think the only point I would make is to refer to paragraph 9, where this inspector, in this particular appeal, talks about and recognises the policy intent which seeks high quality design and complements the local context. And the decision we've just had reported, the one before, seemed to be rather dismissive of that particular local context argument. It just illustrates, I suppose, that each appeal, as with each application, is determined on its individual merits by individual inspectors. But there seems to be some inconsistency between the two. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Any other comment, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then, if we may, to development management. And the first application that we have to consider this afternoon is 6821-105, and this is in respect of Lower Cleve Barns at Cutcombe, and this item is going to be presented by Ms. Daly.
Thanks, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. It's really lovely to see you all. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Vivian.
You're recusing yourself, Mr. White.
It's really lovely to be back in person, I must admit. Item 12.1 of the agenda relates to Lower Cleve Barns at Cutcombe. This application seeks the conversion of a single-storey barn to residential use either as self-catering holiday accommodation or as local needs affordable dwelling. The application comes before committee in accordance with the approved scheme of delegation because the officer's recommendation to approve is contrary to the recommendation of Cutcombe Parish Council. Lower Cleve Barns is located approximately 120 kilometres to the east of Wedden Cross. The red-lined area denotes the extent of the site, including its access. The site is accessed via a drive that leads off of Popery Lane, lying into the northwest of the site, which is in part of a public right-of-way, which is a restricted byway from Cutcombe Cross. The existing agricultural barns lie to the southeast of the Shearwell data site and the hamlet of Putnam. Putnam consists of 4 dwellings and lies approximately 45 metres northwest of the existing buildings. This map shows the application site and its access via the public right-of-way. The dashed blue line indicates land also in the ownership of the applicant, and this extends further northeast for 17 acres and is contiguous. The building that is the subject of the application is the northernmost of the 2 buildings. The plan shows the position of the proposed parking spaces and the turning area, as well as a bin storage area to the north adjacent to the access track and behind the hedge. The existing building is constructed of natural stone for the most part, with some more modern infill using breeze blocks, and has a dual-pitched corrugated metal roof, which does not form the original roof covering. A structural survey was submitted alongside the application and states that the structure of the existing building can be predominantly retained for the proposed conversion, with the most significant of the measures proposed being the strengthening, repairing or replacement of the existing roof. It also states that the building is capable of conversion without substantial reconstruction. The areas highlighted in blue represent the proposed changes to the exterior of the building. These include the replacement of the corrugated metal roof with a natural slate one, the retention of the existing roof profile, whilst raising the height of the roof by approximately 0.92 metres on the northwest elevation and 1.1 metre on the southeast elevation. The proposed works also include the infilling of the existing openings with horizontal timber boarding and timber framed windows, the insertion of a new timber door, the replacement of a timber door with a larger glazed timber framed door, the replacement of an existing window with one of slightly larger dimensions, the insertion of a new single paned window, and the insertion of a new flue pipe. The proposal seeks to convert the building to a 1-bedroom unit of accommodation. The internal floor area measures approximately 65 square metres. This slide shows the existing and proposed site levels. The existing building slopes into the land, and there is a difference of approximately 1.5 metres in the floor level from the northwest elevation to the southeast elevation. The proposal seeks to raise the height of the existing building on both the northwest elevation and the southeast elevation. This shows the existing northeast elevation of the building. The 2 parking spaces, proposed parking spaces, will be sited in the area of hard standing shown, with the land to the left of the photo used as a turning area. This shows the existing southeast elevation. Parking area and turning space are to the right-hand side of the photo, and the ridge height is proposed to be increased by approximately 1.1 metres at this end. The hamlet of Puttham can be seen in the background. This photo shows the existing elevation as well as what currently remains of the existing second building on the site. The application 6821-109 was approved in August 2021 for the repair and rebuild of the timber wall frame and timber cladding of the linhay, together with the installation of a new tiled slate roof. The newly repaired building of what currently exists is conditioned to be used for agricultural purposes only. This is the existing southwest elevation with the existing building lying to the existing new proposed refurbished building lies to the right hand side of this photograph. This photo shows the existing northwest and northeast elevations. Parking and turning area lie to the left hand side, and the ridge height is proposed to be increased by approximately 0.92 metres at this end. This photo shows the relationship between the existing building to be converted, the building to be repaired under approved application 6821-109, and the existing dwellings at Puttham. The proposed development would comprise of the conversion of an existing agricultural barn or building for residential purposes, either as a holiday let or as a local needs affordable dwelling. It is considered that the proposal accords with policies RTD4 for the holiday let accommodation and HCD7 for the conversion to local needs affordable dwelling. Policy HCD13 allows the replacement of holiday occupancy conditions with agreements that limit the occupancy to local persons in affordable housing need in accordance with policy HCS3 for persons meeting the criteria and for persons meeting the criteria for extended family dwellings under HCD5. It is considered that as the local plan policies support the principle of the use of the building as either a holiday let or a local needs affordable dwelling, a pragmatic approach would be to allow flexible permission for use as one or the other, given that separately both uses are acceptable in principle, and policy HCD13 allows for holiday accommodation to become local needs affordable accommodation. The officer's report outlines the main planning considerations, and it is considered that the impact on the public rights of way, highway safety and the neighbouring amenity of the proposed uses of the converted building are acceptable and accord with the relevant policies of the local plan. The application is therefore recommended for approval for the reasons set out on page 17 of the agenda papers and subject to the conditions and the signing of the Section 106 agreement as set out on page 18 of the agenda papers. Additionally, it has been brought to officers' attention that there is the potential for conflict between proposed conditions 9 and 11. Condition 9 seeks the use of natural slate on the roof of the proposed development. Condition 11 seeks the use of matching external materials of the existing building to be used. The intention of this condition was to ensure the use of natural stone was used in the construction or repair of the walls of the building. However, this may conflict with condition 9 insofar as the existing roof is corrugated metal. Should permission be granted, officers request that members allow condition 11 to be amended to reflect that the external walls are either constructed or repaired shall use natural stone to match the existing building. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. We have one public speaker, Mr. Berry, the applicant. Mr. Berry, could you make sure you turn the microphone on by pulling the switch towards you, and you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. Yep. On the top, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, the whole thing.
Yes, you're on.
It's on.
Yes.
Right. Yes, I hadn't heard the planning officer's report because it dealt with an issue of access which has sort of blown up a little bit, and I really am here to address those points which have been made by 3 people. I don't know if the committee's had a chance to look at recent letters from Mrs. Wilkinson and Mr. Croydon and a and a solicitor for Mr. Webber, Richard Webber. When I made the application, I noticed one thing very strongly, which is that this access is hardly ever used. I mean, really, I was there for 3 months at one stage every day, using it at least 2 times a day, sometimes much more, plus deliveries for various materials. And I didn't see anybody. So I began to wonder why that was. And I asked around at my neighbour Bill, who is the only person, by the way, who can see this development. And the only real substantive change to this development is going to be the roof, which is going to move from that to a traditional slate tile. So that's, I suggest, an improvement. The windows will be inserted into the spaces, which will have negligible impact. So the only person who can see is, if you look up there, you can see Bill's top window. He might be able to see the top of the roof. So there is almost no visual impact in this development. There's also no actual change to the use of the access. And I suggest that Mrs. Wilkinson and Mr. Webber and Mr. Croydon have completely overlooked the fact that there's never been any complaint in 2 years to me or anybody else that I know of that there is a problem with this access. They point out a lot of things, but this access is quite good for Exmoor. It's tarmacked, it's got easy parking places. I actually met somebody on Saturday, which was in a wide area, so we didn't even have to pull over. But it's that sort of level. So the reason this Mr. Webber seems to be concerned is that I pointed out that all of the many employees of the nearby Sherwell data seem to be using somewhere else. I've never seen anybody using it.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you've had somewhat over your 2 minutes now, so could you bring your remarks to a close?
All right. I just say, can I endorse the planning officer's remarks about the access? And can I also say, this is a chance for me to put a little bit more back into the community by offering local people somewhere to stay, especially young people who've got on low incomes, and that is very important to me, and I think to the committee.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Berry. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll return.
Could we just maybe have a comment on the access question? Is this a civil legal matter, or is that a material planning consideration?
With regards to the access, my understanding is that some comments made in the original application made reference to the private access to Sherwell data. Mr. Berry has subsequently confirmed that there will be no use of that access at Sherwell data, and he continues to use the right of way and the access that he has rights of way over.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, member debate. Does any member wish to comment, please? Dr. Kelly.
I don't always want to be the first one to speak, Chairman, but in the absence of anyone else, could I just seek clarification on a couple of points? If we look at the planning history, and one of the photographs showed a linny, which I think was the subject of application 6/8/2109. Was that the same building that was the subject of the earlier application that was refused to be converted to a dwelling?
These are the same barns.
So they're the same barns.
Same site.
Right, so that the building that we see the framework of was initially refused in 2015 for residential use as part of that application. But
I think that's considered both of the barns for conversion.
Okay, but was subsequently approved. But the application description talks about its repair and rebuild. What was that for, can I ask? It was just repair and rebuild for agricultural use?
Yes, it's conditioned for agricultural purposes only. It's my understanding there'll be storage of hay and fodder and things.
Right. So you're not anticipating an application, which we can't do, of course, for that to be converted. I just want to clarify that planning history. I think the second point was simply in terms of access. I think it was mentioned there would be no change in that access. Well, access is, of course, rights of access is outside the planning system, as we know. and that was alluded to. But in terms of any conversion to residential use, there would be a change, because each dwelling would attract between 6 and 8, an average of 7 vehicle movements a day. So I just want to clarify that particular point. And the other point I just want to make at this stage is condition 3. So this is an interesting application. It's an either or. So we've got an application still, as it stands, either as self-catering holiday accommodation or local needs affordable. Yeah. And if we were looking at local needs affordable, it's subject to Section 106 agreement, which I see as part of the recommendation. I think my concern would be if it was instead used as holiday accommodation, that would still be the same use class as a residential dwelling. So our use class C3. So are you satisfied that it could not then be used as an open market dwelling? Because it would not be the subject of any 106 legal agreement, and you'd be relying on the conditions that you put forward.
The Section 106 agreement, it contains both the holiday let accommodation and the local needs affordable, so the Section 106 ties the both
so
uses.
it anticipates both uses?
Yes.
That's fine. Thank you, Chairman. Yes.
Yeah, on the subject of either or, is there anything in policy to control a situation, for instance, where it's occupied as a local needs rental, for example? Going back to a point I made earlier, reference the holiday accommodation. Is there anything in there to stop a landlord evicting tenants if he sees there to be more pounds to be made from the holiday let market, whether that be probably in the short term? Is there anything in policy to stop that happening? Because if there's not, I suspect we wouldn't be too happy with creating a situation where that happened.
I think legally that's a challenge, and it's not particularly for the planning system to manage that. Now, what we've tried to do as part of this recommendation is to show versatility in our decisions, so show that there could be a number of uses that might be acceptable with the building, and then yes, it would then be for the owner of that building to then decide how they take it forward within the confines of the planning permission. But in terms of a landlord being in a position where they are able to give notice on somebody who's renting it as a local needs affordable, then no, there wouldn't be anything to prevent that. And actually the planning permission isn't trying to stop that. It's trying to allow the versatility of somebody either to realise the commercial benefits of the planning permission, or through helping local community and local families to have a unit of accommodation.
It doesn't to me sound ideal.
Well, I don't think policy allows us to do anything other than that, Mr. Lay. I don't think the situation that you've described this morning, and that has to some degree been prevalent over the last few months, is anything that our plan can legislate for. Is it?
No, you're quite correct, and what is really important to remain in focus while you're making the decision here today is we have to determine what's put in front of us. And so the application is for that dual use, and it's important that you consider that on merits. And as the Chair has rightly just put out, said, that our on-balance officer feels that both those uses would be acceptable.
I'm afraid you can't. I'm afraid. No, I'm sorry. No, once we start the members' debate, that's it. But thank you, Mrs. Nicholson.
Thank you. Things. And beforehand, I want to make clear I have not declared an interest because I stopped working for Shearwell Data 10 years ago. Yes, 10 years ago, and have no connection with it. But I do know the site and the area very well because I drove in and out of the old plane every day for 12 years. But what I want to mention two things. One of them is the application, which is very clear at the beginning, where it says proposed conversion of single-storey barn to residential use either as self-catering holiday accommodation or low-rent housing for local people, people working in the vicinity. And I just want to be very clear that what we're permitting, if we permit it, is that. And we tend to use a shorthand of affordable local needs, which then leads people to say that means we've got to have the 10-year connection, and I hope that what we're doing is something which talks about local people and people working in the vicinity. That's my first point. The only other one is that access. There is a bit of public right-of-way. It is also, and this was hard fought through the County Council, now a link section to the highway, so it is maintained as a link to the highway.
Whilst your earlier point is being considered, I'm just going to ask Mr. Cravis to come in. Well, you were the next on the list.
That's all right. No, I thought I'd be about 8 down. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, with regard to the open market, I mean not the open market, the affordable or the holiday accommodation, I assume that reading through the application, if this came forward as either, it would probably be acceptable. So therefore, I think as we said, the flexibility there is quite useful and could be quite interesting, even though it's only 1 bedroom. With regard to that, has no one moved this yet? Because I'm quite happy.
No, but you're about to.
I will.
Yes,
I'll move it for approval.
So it's been moved by Mr. Cravis, seconded.
If I've got a second.
Oh, by Mrs. Nicholson. Right, thank you. Can we just have a response to the plan point that Mrs. Nicholson raised?
Yes, so the local needs occupancy criteria policy, which is HCS 3, contains a list of people who could live in that, and one of those points is that they carry out paperwork which is valued to the national park. So
That is the bit that worries me. It's the tightness of that. Whether that will be very tightly drawn or not. As has been said in various public engagements over the plan, every job is valuable.
Well, and indeed this was part of the discussion we were having very recently about whether or not it's the guidance and advice that backs up the policies that
and
we perhaps need to
that we will be having next
week. Indeed.
So let's preempt it now.
Yeah. Right. Are there any other points, ladies and gentlemen? It's been proposed and seconded that we should accept the application. Right, may I see then all those in favour of approval? But if you can remember please that the condition regarding the wall materials is to say the condition 11, the external wall materials to be used in the construction of the development. So there is that minor change. Mr. Cravis, did you want to? No, you vote, that's fine. All those in favour? NEMCON, thank you very much. So that stands approved. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you back.
thank you very much. Thank you.
So we have to get Mr. White back. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we may then, we will move on, noting that Miss Stacey has recused herself from this item. We will move on to item 6.3.21.120, which is proposed construction of Dark Skies Discovery Hub, stargazing and seating area at Wimblewall Lake. And this is going to be presented by Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, nice to meet you all. This is item 12.2. It is, as the Chairman's pointed out, it's an application for a stargazing facility at Wimblewall Lake. The application presented to committee for decision. According to the scheme of delegation, the officer recommendation is for approval and the Parish Council has objected. In addition, the Exmoor National Park Authority is involved in the funding process, and more on both these points subsequently. So the site is just under 6 kilometres or 4 miles from here to the northeast, just east of Brompton Regis, at the South West Lakes Trust facility, Movable Lakes, and Outdoor Activities Centre. Sorry, I need my glasses to look this, and when I look up, you're all fuzzy, so it's sorry if I get disoriented. Yes. So that's the general locality. That is showing the location, the original location. It was moved slightly to the west. More on that in a moment. There it is. So here you'll see the main buildings at the north of at the centre. Hill Farm here is a listed building. This is the specific location. So I'll just talk a bit more about the locality. So the application falls within the confines of the main hub for visitors. So it's situated to the west of the lake, between the activity centre, cafe, car parks, water sports, launch area. The land is currently managed as a grassland with a hay cut taken in late summer. The proposal is for a stargazing hub that overlooks the lake in a southeasterly direction. And the design of the hub proposed is a low seating area with a circular flat patio style platform where people would use telescopes. It's a wall on the northwest side there would be constructed of using rubble stone, blue lias, and an earth bank. And people familiar with the site will be familiar that the land falls from that sort of northwest left side quite steeply down to the right. So there'd be a kind of earth mound and wall on the northwest side with you can see the surface there and the seating on the northwest side there, which would be constructed of steel and wood. And in the centre there would be an engraved a centrepiece to interpret constellations. I'll come to that next diagram in a moment. So representations, as I say, the Parish Council's objectives raised concerns with respect to the generation of further traffic, noting incremental growth. The site suggested that a different site could be better. The Highway Authority raises no concern. The NPA Public Rights of Way Officer notes the presence of a footpath to the east, which I shall come back to later. West Water and South West Water both flag at their apparatus near the site. Now that's that blue line there. Is my cursor appearing on there yet? So you will see the original location was there, and it's now moved slightly to the west. That should resolve the situation, but an informative can be put on the permission if granted, pointing out that you need consent from Wessex Water and South West Water if you're going to interfere with any of their apparatus in any way. The EMPA Wildlife Officer advises that suitable measures in place impacts are likely to be negligible. I'll come back to that in a moment. And the Future Landscapes Officer makes no objection. Again, I'll talk about that in a moment. One representation has been received from a neighbouring property, questioning need and raising concern with respect to amenity, particularly at night, biodiversity and traffic congestion. So moving to planning considerations, the key consideration obviously is the principal development, other issues, impact on landscape, amenity, highway safety, design, ecology, all in the report, and I shall run through those briefly. Think about the principle of development. As detailed in the report, policies RT D10, RT S1 and SE S1 offer some support and encouragement for this type of facility. Recreational development, high quality, inclusive visitor experience, so I'm just picking some words from the policies there that enhance the understanding and enjoyment of national parks' special qualities. Also development that would strengthen and enhance diversity of the economy. So I think in principle the plan is supportive of this facility. We need to look at the details obviously. In terms of need, the partnership plan and the corporate plan both make references to the need for this type of facility. I think it's action point 22 refers to dark skies, delivering dark skies tourism development and projects including dark sky discovery trail and the hub business engagement, interpreting events. And I think the need is established through these two plans. As noted in my report, that over the last 2 years, the authority has used funding secured from the Hinckley Tourism Action Partnership to develop astro-tourism developments. This is seen as the final element as a second hub here at Wimbleville. As referenced earlier, the authority is providing approximately 1/3 of the funding using those HTAP funds. Moving to landscape impact, the future landscape officer raises no objection and notes that the centre lies in a character area, enclosed farmed hills with common landscape, and comments that the grounds around the activity centre include woodland blocks, hedgerows and grassland, and physical buildings, activities, which is not typical of that landscape character, and the conclusion is that the proposed facility is largely at ground level, it would have minimal visual impact beyond the immediate surrounds. So my view in reports that the development is visually part of the facility, seen from what's a man-made reservoir. It's set within recreational impacts. The location, layout, design would preserve character and appearance of the landscape. Ecology, noting the point, the comments of the wildlife officer, it's considered that a construction environmental management plan and ecology enhancement plan would avoid harm and secure benefits, so they would be through conditions. There's a listed building at Hill Farm to the north. My view is that the distance, topography, vegetation, discrete design mean there will be no harm to heritage assets or their setting. Our public rights of way officers has flagged the importance of ensuring that during the construction phase there's no harm or interference to the footpath, which you can just see here, albeit people do wander around, as you may be aware. And considering highway impacts, obviously our policy ACD2 requires that development would not prejudice road safety interests. The applicants advise that there's approximately 200,000 visitors per annum. The facility has 470 cars, 5 disability spaces, 12 cycle spaces. They're not proposing additional facilities, and my view is that with each event, where there are specific events that would be, the applicant advises like 10 to 15 people. I think that's negligible in the whole context. It might be people who are already on site, but worst case you might get a couple of minibuses, few cars. I think the context of the scenario, the existing use, and will be negligible. Considering amenity, again, I think the nature, scope, and magnitude of proposed development would be have a negligible impact on residential amenity. Although noting during the construction phase, it's important that noise is kept to a minimum, and we can use condition around hours. Returning to design, note that rather than having this sort of facility away from in a more remote location, I think it's it limits the impact by having it within an existing visitor centre, within the context of other buildings, minimising landscape impact. Design utilises local materials, including stone, soil from the local area, and my view is the proposals within the requirements of policy CS6, and in addition, the impact on climate resulting from construction proposed development, this ongoing use would not be such that you wish to refuse an application. So, to conclude, the proposed development would further the objectives of the partnership plan and the corporate plan, and I think it meets the requirements of planning policy, specifically not result in harm to the environment, landscape, biodiversity, heritage assets, not likely to harm residential amenity, and the increase in traffic activity will be negligible. The recommendation is approval subject to conditions, just quickly going through those. Standard time limit, in accordance with drawings, construction environmental management plan, ecological enhancement plan, and restriction on lighting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. We have a speaker, and that's Ms. Tame, who is speaking on behalf of the South West Lakes Trust as the applicant. So, Ms. Tame, you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. If you could just check that the microphone is on.
No? Yes.
Tap it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, thank you. I've just written a short statement just to respond to some of the concerns that were raised, so I'll just read through that if I may. So Wimblewall Lake was chosen for a modest dark skies discovery hub, as it already provides for visitor facilities such as toilets, car parking, camping and accessibility. The hub will require operational staff management, storage for telescopes, educational materials, and also requires southerly views and low horizons, all of which would be offered by the chosen location, making it ideal for astronomy. The fact that the site's already well used means that engaging with daytime visitors with our dark skies and the opportunities for enjoyment and understanding is there, and the small scale hub has great potential for impact on supporting people to engage with our dark skies and to understand the need to conserve them. The plans have been supported by Exmoor stargazers, saying that the location is very suitable and it would integrate well with other activities on the site, and having that ability to combine night stargazing activities with wildlife events makes it much more feasible, but particularly when there's dubious cloud cover, etc., which makes it difficult. So if there's alternative activities that people can partake in, then it makes it more feasible for people to come along. Obviously, Wimblewall's it's not the darkest place on Exmoor, but it is plenty dark enough for outreach astronomy, which is what this is designed for. The concept of the hub is for it to be managed with use for smaller groups of people, and it would be largely out of the main season and during the evenings when the majority of visitors have left, and also providing an additional facility for campers who are staying on site. And many of the beneficiaries would be either day visitors or staying longer. Just to conclude, we'll continue to manage the meadow that it will sit in as a grassland meadow with our annual hay cut, and the construction will benefit invertebrates as well, so adding to the biodiversity. And then just to finish, obviously the hub will support the National Park's desire to engage more people with the night skies and to understand the benefits of the night skies and why we need to conserve them.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Kay. Thank you. Thank you very much. We now move to the member debate. Mrs. Nicholson was the first on my list.
Not the first.
Well, I will go elsewhere if you'd rather, Mrs. Nicholson.
No, I'm not proposing anything, but there are one or two things I want to say. Where a community has a large organisation with a site close to it, it's always difficult because there's always felt to be a power imbalance. And to take it away from here, the problem at Dunster is that the castle is up and the National Trust are at the top of the hill and the town is at the foot. You know, the rich man in his castle, the poor man, you know, at the gate, and that's how it tends to feel. Bronson Regis feels a bit overwhelmed at times. These are not planning considerations, but I think we need to be aware of them. They see a large organisation doing things which are very splendid, but nothing very much to do with them. And they worry about the traffic. And Mr. Jones has very carefully gone through that, and the difference this will make is neither here nor there. But they do worry about overdevelopment in a rural area. They do worry about evening do's, because there have in the past been festival type things which have happened there which have created enormous amounts of noise which has echoed right around the whole area. Not very often, very rarely, but it's happened, and this is part of the worry about overdevelopment. And I think that for us, we actually need to and that's why I said I'm not proposing, these are remarks about it, which I think we just need to hold in our minds. Maybe we at some point ought to look at large organisations which are outside settlements or really not felt to be to do with those settlements, and what we think overdevelopment might be or might not be. But this is you see why I didn't want to be first. This is for a future debate rather than for now. And I can quite see why the suggestion of another site came from the parish council. Not that it would give public transport access, but it would give car park and nobody much nearby. And you can see why they would suggest that. And my only other thing is, I did have wonder whether I'd slip back into the application before, where when we're talking about climate change, and the building would see a long-term impact on the climate, but it's considered to ensure necessary to ensure the continued running of the farm in the interest of the proper management of the protected landscape. I think that isn't quite what we're doing here, but never mind. I did check. I was in the right application, not the one before. So I'm neither proposing nor not proposing. I'm just saying that these are among the concerns that come up with this kind of application, and maybe at some point we ought to think about that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's right, bearing in mind that the principal reason why this application is before us is because the parish council took a view which is contrary to that of the officers, that we should actually reflect on some of those views. And so thank you for bringing them forward. Mr. Ellicott.
Well, contrary to Francis, I will propose that we approve this application. I have thought for a long time that although we've got some dark skies initiatives going on, it's nowhere near enough. I'm lucky that I've travelled to several other national parks that were long way behind us in being designated as a dark sky, and they've gone that extra mile. They've put up observatories and places where people can go and plonk their telescopes down and enjoy what we've got here. And I feel that we should approve it. It's not a big building. It's just basically a hard pad that with seats around that people can sit around, and I don't think it'll make so much difference to the traffic in the area. The only thing they will find possibly is that the people going for the dark skies will meet occasionally the people that are leaving, that have been there canoeing or doing whatever. So I don't think it will affect the area so much as what is perceived to be a problem. And as I say, for that reason, I propose that we accept this.
Right, thank you, Mr. Ellicott. Seconded, please, by Dr. Kelly. Do you wish to speak, Dr. Kelly, or have to reserve your position?
Well, the only point I'd make is Francis does make some very good points, but on its individual merits, this is not likely to turn Wimbleball into the theme park that's feared. It's understood that, but I've read the comments of the parish council. Wherever it's located, it's going to attract some traffic, but in the context of what's already there, it's a minimal change. So on those merits, and it's a very good report, thank you, and it does reflect our strategic plan, the partnership plan, and it does not conflict with any of the planning policies, and on that basis, quite happy to second the resolution to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Lay, you want to come in?
Yeah, it's probably been said, Mr. Chairman. Just slightly different. Following on from what Francis said, I think it's human nature that they are attracted by water. It's just a simple fact. Now, I suspect Mike Mike to my right here might have been living on Dartmoor when, remember a lady called Lady Sayer? Now, Swincombe was the perfect place for a reservoir in terms of its catchment and its deep valleys, the perfect spot. She succeeded in stopping it. But I would suggest here to stop anything now. It's long, long past after the horse is bolted. Yeah, I'm sad to say, but water does attract people. That partially is why a site like this is probably first choice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lay. Mr. Thwaites.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose, knowing where it is, my concern would be the additional traffic. I know people are saying it's not a lot, but that's a one-track road with very minimal passing places to get access into there anyway. And if you remember when we had the lockdown, we had a lot of traffic across the bridge, and there was a lot of complaints from farmers about that access itself, which they found great difficulty getting their tractors down the road when people were parked in the lay-bys or the passing places, which greatly restricted them. So I think we've got to be careful we don't sort of play down the fact it will increase traffic. I'm not saying it's not a bad thing to have it there, but I just think you should point it out and realise that any increase is going to make life a little bit more difficult than it is currently.
Absolutely valid, Mr. Thwaites, and thank you for raising it. But we are in the position, I suppose, that the County Council Highways haven't raised any objection to any additional traffic, and so it's difficult for us to sustain an objection on that grounds. Right, but again, it's right that you should be airing the concerns of the Parish Council. Mrs. Lawrence.
I just want to check about comings and goings in late evening, things like that. So is this going to be open for anybody to use at any time, or is it going to be like a curfew? And because there's campsites and all sorts of things going on, I was just thinking out of the box. If I was living there and staying the night or one, and people started coming at 11 o'clock or something to look at night.
I hear that. It is, however, a very small facility, really. So, I mean, the numbers aren't going to be hundreds, are they? They're going to be probably fewer than 10.
I just wonder how it's going to be advertised for use.
Yeah.
You know, bearing in mind, we just don't want to upset the community on day one, as it were. You know, so.
Mr. Kinsella.
Yeah, just to clarify, from a planning point of view, it would be extremely difficult to control the use of it. Bear in mind, it's an open facility. It's not like a building in which you can lock. So it will be used during the day and the night. And I think just by its nature, the development will attract relatively small numbers because of the scale of it again. So I think we can take some comfort for that. That doesn't mean that we haven't had due regard to the potential impact upon the local highway network, and that's been through the consultation with the Highway Authority, who have stated that they don't have a significant adverse comment around it.
I think it's a great idea, but I don't want to start off on the wrong foot, really. I am concerned about people arriving very late in the evening.
Right, Mr. Cravis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can understand where the concerns from the Parish Council come from. There's plenty of other areas in the district, should I say, not just the National Park, that maybe have similar issues where there's an attraction. And let's be honest, it is an attraction. It's probably a jewel, not quite. If it's not a jewel, well, it's probably a jewel in a large crown that is Exmoor. And you know, with regard to goings on at night and who comes and goes, I don't think stargazing is a licensing activity yet, Chair, although it would make for some entertaining licensing committees if it was. With that, I would have seconded, but it's already done. I'll leave it at that and happily vote in favour.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Gravis. Mr. Holton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's just a practicality, really. I've assumed from what has been said that the car parking facilities that are existing are going to be used, and public WC toilets were mentioned as well. Is it a reasonable condition to ensure that there is access to public toilets when this can be used? I'm just thinking of... I think they should be open. If you're inviting members of the public there, they should have that facility, or there will be reasons for local people to be annoyed.
I mean, obviously there will be existing facilities on the site because of there is part of the site that's used as campsite, so there will be provision around that. I mean, in terms of us having a planning condition that says they have to provide it, I think that would be difficult to defend, if I'm completely honest with you, in terms of it would appear somewhat unnecessary. Obviously, the applicant, as the owner of the site, would want it managed in a way that it doesn't jeopardise the ongoing wider activity that is taking place on the site. So I think my view would be that it's probably not necessary. And again, we are talking about relatively small numbers, and for those that do need to use facilities, there is the potential for the applicant to allow access to the existing camping facilities. But that, for me, would be a management issue for the applicant rather than the planning authority to dictate through planning conditions.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've probably exhausted the debate. It's been proposed by Mr. Ellicott and seconded by Dr. Kelly that we should approve this application. May I see all those in favour, please? I think that again is NEMCOM. Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I hope your baptism wasn't too horrifying. We move on to item 13, which is applications delegated to the Chief Executive, and as usual, Mr. Kinsella will take us through the highlights, and then we'll go through page by page.
Thank you, Chair. Another busy month for the development management team. In total, there was 27 decisions. Of those, 88% resulted in a positive decision. And that's been through a lot of hard work from officers during pre-application and application stage. In terms of the decisions that were refused, there was 3 in total. So just to direct you to those, the first one is on page 3 at the very bottom for the glebe, and this was an application for the proposed conversion of a barn to a dwelling and was a resubmission of a previous refused application. The issues regarding this related to the fact that there was no ecology survey that was submitted, so there was no way of us being able to assess the harm or otherwise to any protected species that might be using the existing building, and also the applicant was not willing to enter into a section 106 to restrict the occupation of the property to a person who was in need, as set out in the policy that Yvonne did earlier. So it's obviously open to the applicant to appeal that decision. I would certainly hope that we could have further discussions and try and deal with the final couple of points that feel absolutely achievable for us to be able to negotiate through and deliver much needed housing. But that is in the hands of the applicant at the moment. And then on the final page, on page 4, this the bottom 2 decisions. Foxfield, which was the proposed change of use of land for the siting of ground-mounted solar panels. The panels themselves were located in proposed to be located in a position away from the main dwelling, so it was considered to be isolated, and as a result there was considered to be landscape harm caused by that. And again, there was also concern that there appeared to be a lack of information regarding ecology. So again, officers will be open to further discussions if we're not already having those, to see if there is a solution, because obviously we'd wish to support this type of development. And then the final one, which was at Ashbere House, was a certificate of lawfulness for stationing of a mobile home, and that was purely on the basis that there was considered to be insufficient information to satisfy us that the mobile home had been in position for the requisite time. Apart from that, that was it, I think, Chair. I'll go for page by
Thank
page.
you very much. So, as customary, we'll go through it page by page. Anything that any members wish to raise on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? And page 4. Super, thank you very much. So the last item is 14. Should there be a need for a site visit, the reserve date is the 29th of April in the morning, Friday the 29th of April, although I think at the moment there's no hint that we might require that, but it is the reserve date should something arise and we need it. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close, and thank you very much for your attendance and your lively attention.